that better? Okay. So the first order of business will be the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'll all join me in that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, we have 3 proclamations tonight, each one of them representative of the people in our community. And so I'll come forward and then we'll have the first proclamation, which will be Little Apple Pride Day. And if I miss your name and you're associated, please come forward anyway. Drevell Taylor, Jamila Johnstone, that's Janella, I know better. C. Kim Chi, Ashley Hendricks, Kevin Stilley, Hannah Schultz, Megan McCall, and Mary Renee. Well, as most of you know, the City Commission was approached some time ago and asked to be a city of inclusivity. And we had some great people in our city working on this. They worked very hard for a long time, brought a lot of rationale to us. It was something that I think had been considered for a long time, but it really needed a push to get done. And these people standing here in front of you are remarkable people who worked very hard to have that happen. So we're going to recognize them with the reading of a proclamation today. And I think Saturday after next, we'll have a big event in the park. So we'd encourage everyone to go, and we'll have an opportunity to say a little bit more about that in a minute. So you...
Absolutely. Whereas Manhattan recognizes that it has a diverse community, which includes LGBTQ plus individuals from all walks of life. Whereas in November 2016, the Manhattan City Commission added sexual orientation and gender identity to the discrimination prohibition, which makes it unlawful to discriminate in employment, housing, or public accommodations. And Manhattan's LGBTQ plus community have the right to live without fear of harassment and persecution and not be discriminated against. Whereas on this special occasion, we must bear in mind that while we have overcome difficult obstacles, tolerance and acceptance is something we must practice and teach future generations. Now therefore, Michael Dodson, Mayor of the City of Manhattan, Kansas, proclaims April 13, 2019 as Little Apple Pride Day and encourages all citizens of Manhattan to celebrate the lives of our LGBTQ plus community by continuing to make this a safe, understanding, and welcoming community.
Somebody would like to say a few words? Of course. Okay.
Hello everybody, my name is Drevell Taylor. I am the president of the Little Apple Pride Committee. And on behalf of the Little Apple Pride Committee, and as those who have worked on this in prior years, I would like to thank you all for this proclamation, invite the City Commission and everyone in the city to celebrate Little Apple Pride Day 2019 to show support and love for those in the LGBTQ plus community. This is our 10th year celebrating Pride, and we predict a turnout larger than ever before. The parade begins at noon and will make its way along Points Avenue up to City Park. The celebration in City Park begins immediately following the parade and continues until 5:00 p.m. that night. The festival at the park will feature entertainment from local and regional performers, as well as various vendors and exhibitors. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you all at Little Apple Pride Day.
And if you want to be in the parade, tell me.
Woman, a few words.
Thank you very much. This is also Fair Housing Month, and Eric, and Brad, and Joanne. Well, the city is working very hard to elevate our game in housing, and one of the reasons that we're so good is because of these people standing here in front of you. You know, we take advantage of as many programs as we possibly can, work that very hard. You know, you send your money to Washington, and these guys work very hard to bring it back here and use it in a meaningful way. We got the high rise reopened, a lot of very hard work to make that go right. And we've got a lot of projects around the city that will help in addition to that. And Brad and his team work very hard to make sure that whatever we build and whatever we have is safe. And we enact ordinances to make sure everybody has an equal opportunity to get in that housing. And I think it's working pretty well. It doesn't mean that we don't have initiatives to make it even better, but we're trying pretty hard right now. So we'll read the proclamation.
Whereas the City of Manhattan is committed to the mission and intent of Congress to provide fair and equal housing opportunities for all. Whereas the fair housing groups and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development have, over the years, received thousands of complaints of alleged illegal housing discrimination and found too many that have proved upon investigation to be violations of the fair housing laws. Whereas equal housing opportunity is a condition of life in our city that can and should be achieved. Now therefore, Michael Dodson, Mayor of the City of Manhattan, Kansas, proclaims the month of April 2019 as Fair Housing Month and express the hope that this year's observance will promote fair housing practices throughout the city.
Once again this year, the City of Manhattan, in partnership with the Manhattan Housing Authority, is sponsoring the Fair Housing Seminar, which is going to be held on Thursday, April 18th at the fire station headquarters. It's free. You can register online on the city website, or you can call the Community Development Department at 587-2412 to register. We just need to know how many people are coming. There is a limited seating. It's in the lecture hall at the fire station. I think it holds maybe around 75 or 80, 100. I think we've got about 50 registered so far, so there is still room. Brad is giving the first session, which starts right after 8. Joanne is giving the second session, and then Housing and Credit Counseling is doing the third session, and it should wrap up around 12:30. So we would invite anybody, whether you're a tenant, a landlord, a realtor, a banker, anybody that's involved in housing, we would invite and encourage you to sign up to come to the seminar. Thanks.
One of my favorite parts of that is the Landlord-Tenant Act, and they do a great job in presenting that. There's a lot of things that people don't know that are in that, and that's one of the things we're trying to do to educate everyone, so everyone knows what their rights are as a tenant and is able to work well with the landlords. Landlords know these things pretty well themselves, so hopefully we can make some progress there. We also have a proclamation for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So Paulina, can you and Claire come forward? So these are one of those occasions that you don't like to have to celebrate in this way, but you know, quite frankly, we have this happening more and more around our nation, and each of us, each of these municipalities, each of our cities has to take a role in doing our best for prevention. And I think it starts with recognition. Our director of the RCPD is here. Mental health people are here, and I know they're all working very hard. We have any number of committees that get together to incorporate all of the people who have something to do with this. We're also in partnership, obviously, with Kansas State University and others. So, again, I just encourage you to pay attention to this issue, and I'm sure that you both will be advocating not only this month, but in the future. So could you publish the proclamation, please?
Whereas 1 in 6 women and 1 in 33 men will be sexually assaulted during their lifetime, with approximately 1 person sexually assaulted every 98 seconds. Whereas when a family member is sexually assaulted, it can cause long-term detrimental effects on the victim, which also affects the family, friends, and community. Whereas victims should have access to all resources required during the healing process, which includes medical services, legal services, counseling, and housing services that further healing following a sexual assault. And it is important to acknowledge the hard work, dedication, and kindness of the individuals that provide assistance and services to victims of sexual assault. Now therefore, Michael Dodson, Mayor of the City of Manhattan, Kansas, proclaims the month of April as Sexual Assault Awareness Month and encourage all citizens of Manhattan to display their commitment to eradicating sexual assault and devote themselves to protect vulnerable and at-risk members of our society.
I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to be able to advocate for all the survivors we have in Kansas and also in Manhattan. I'm also a title holder with the Miss Kansas organization, as well as an advocate for the No More organization, which seeks to eliminate sexual assault and domestic violence through means like advocacy, awareness, and education. But also, I'm a volunteer with the Center for Advocacy, Response, and Education, and their mission is to help change rape culture and change into a culture of consent at the K-State community level and also at the Manhattan community level. And now Claire is going to speak a little bit more about what she does in her role.
Hi everyone, my name is Clara Valadares-Kentz and I am the Assistant Director of K-State Center for Advocacy, Response, and Education. And our office, much like Polly said, is to provide resources and support for anyone who has experienced sexual violence or any form of intimate partner violence. We provide services and resources just to get them connected to many different options and help them empower them through their healing process. We very much appreciate you all being here today and joining us in this proclamation, and encourage you to continue to celebrate with us and acknowledge the impact that sexual violence has on families and individuals, not only in the nation, but also here in our community. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 16 men will experience sexual violence in college. Those numbers are quite higher, obviously, for the outside community, but we recognize that this is affecting not just the community, but also us at the university level. And we have several events throughout the month of April that we encourage you to help take part in with us. We have an art installation called What Were You Wearing, which challenges the rape myths and the rape culture that exists within our society, and we encourage you to come visit that if you get a chance this month. And we will also be seeing you all at Little Apple Pride.
We'll now move to Section 3, which is public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone who wishes to come forward and discuss any item that's on their mind. These are the items that are not under consideration tonight on the agenda. So non-agenda items, anyone who wishes to come forward, please do so at this time.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Mayor Dodson, your speech for the Fair Housing Proclamation was a perfect segue into my visit this evening. The Manhattan Housing Authority, as you mentioned, did open the apartment towers at 300 North Fifth Street last October. Unfortunately, leasing has been much slower than anticipated. We have ran through our waiting list. We had a huge waiting list when we reopened the towers, and several people had moved on, found other arrangements. Some we were not able to contact, some simply did not qualify. Unfortunately, our waiting lists are running low, so hence my presence this evening. We wish to get the word out to the community. For those who are listening, for those in the room, we did a In Focus segment on the radio a couple weeks ago, and we heard a lot of comments from the public about how surprised they were at how high our income guidelines are. I think there is a misconception out in the community that you have to be really, really, really poor to qualify for low-income housing, and that's just not the case. One person, and I'm focusing on one person because we're focusing on getting that high-rise filled up. One person can make over $40,000 a year and still qualify to live in the high-rise or any one-bedroom unit in our public housing developments. We have 5 of them throughout the city. 4 people in a household can make $57,750 and still qualify for low-income public housing. So the Manhattan Housing Authority is kind of ramping up its efforts to get the word out into the community and let them know that we have openings, we have vacancies, not only 1 bedroom, we have 2, 3, and 4 bedroom vacancies as well. We need to build up our waiting list, we need to fill our units. That's what we're here for, is to provide decent, safe, and sanitary housing to low-income persons in the community. But I should say low to moderate income persons in the community, not just low-income persons. So thank you for your ear, and I hope the word gets out. If anybody ever has any questions about whether they may qualify, please give our office a call, Manhattan Housing Authority. Thank you.
Joanne, you have several, what I call a studio. What do you call, I forgot what you...
We call them efficiencies. But
Efficiencies.
They're essentially a studio apartment.
Yeah, studio apartment. And you have several of those that you're really trying to recruit heavily for.
Yes, we are. And that's mainly what we have left at the high rise.
In the high rise.
Yes, is the studio apartments. And they're very suitable for a one-person household. The bachelors love them because there's not much cleaning to do.
What is the income height, or the income cap for?
One person?
Uh-huh.
Is $40,450.
Really? Okay, there you go.
For one person.
So, as people struggle with the costs of housing in our community, the Public Housing Authority is a real alternative.
It is, yes, it is, and it's a very good alternative, and we know that there are people out there in the community struggling with their rent on a daily basis, and we try to work closely with the emergency shelter and the crisis center and all of the social service agencies in the community. But unfortunately, sometimes the word just doesn't get out to those who need it the most. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. Anyone else wishing to comment tonight? All right, well, seeing no one, we'll close the public comment and move to item 4, which is commissioner comments. So start, Linda, if you like.
Yes, I would just like to make sure that folks in the Manhattan area know about the Flint Hills Regional Council annual conference. This year, it's going to be in Junction City at the Marriott on April the 24th. There's a small registration fee, but it's an effort to bring people throughout this region together, to get us to think on regional terms and not just on strictly local terms. And there'll be some great presentations. So if you're interested in that, just let me know. I'll be happy to help you make that connection.
I'll be quick, and it's really just an echo of the proclamation, one of the proclamations, but I really encourage everybody, if you have a chance on April 13th, to go out and visit the Little Apple Pride Day celebration. It's really a celebration of our community and how we're striving for equity. I've said this before, but I'll give us another shout out. The Human Rights Campaign does an equality index of cities every year around the country. They did them for cities here in Kansas, so Olathe, Overland Park, Topeka, Wichita, Hutch, Lawrence. We scored the highest of any city in Kansas on that equality index for things that we're doing in this community to create an equitable environment. A big part of that has to do with the non-discrimination ordinance that the 4 commissioners next to me passed in 2016. So I just wanted to give all of them a shout out for that, but also just encourage you to go to that event and attend and kind of celebrate the strides that we've made as a community over the last 2 or 3 years.
Thanks. Anything?
Yes, so this week is citywide cleanup, so I know this is the second day in it, so if you're still in that, on that map for where they need to come, get your stuff ready. I think we're good with the weather. The young ladies were here from the Care Center at K-State for the sexual assault proclamation. There is another event going on April 13th. That seems to be the big day for all events. This is in the morning. It's called A Walk a Mile in Her Shoes. And it's sponsored by the Care Center at K-State. And you don't have to have high heels, but it's just to walk a mile, and they provide high heels for you, but how women go through their daily life. And if you don't feel like walking, you can also donate money. And every 2 minutes, someone in America is getting raped. So they talked about the other assaults and 93 seconds and all of that. So this is just something that's invisible, and a way for us to become advocates for, but it's also about men, for men to get involved in this issue as well. It's not just a woman's issue.
Thanks. Well, I think we've talked about this before, but we're moving obviously from the removal of snow and ice through the pickup period that Usha just described. So all this week we'll be doing that, and then everybody in the city will be turning their attention to roads and all that entails. And Rob Ott, who's our Director of Public Works, has put on all of our media those areas that will be being worked on. I mean, on one hand, we're very happy that the city and the citizens recognize the need for this, and we got some sales tax help to do that. On the other hand, just be prepared, because as we go about this work, there'll be some road closures that you'll have to contend with. And we're trying to do this at the pace that we can. We're trying to do it in a way that will inconvenience the fewest. So we recognize that once school gets out and that period between then and when it reconvenes, we have the best chance for inconveniencing the fewest people. But everybody's going to be out in force, so if you have any extra orange cones, see Rob Ott, you can use every one you can get. Yeah, buy stock. And the other thing that goes along with the cleanup, we just, not for you sitting here, but hopefully that folks that may be listening or watching, you know, we've had for several years now a real incentive to go out and try to get our city into the kind of shape that we want it in. We've had several initiatives, but I just ask all the citizens of Manhattan, as you're doing your cleanup, and there's a lot of things that just kind of make the whole city pop. You know, the downtown and Aggieville do great things with hanging baskets and lights and all of that. But for private citizens, keeping your yard care under control, keeping things edged along the curbs, You know, if you drive into Kansas State University up 17th, what you like to see is those nice tidy homes all the way from Fort Riley Boulevard on in. And the same thing when you're coming down Anderson in some areas. So particularly for our thoroughfares where our visitors come in, just ask people really to pay attention to that. The city's gonna, we have a mowing contract year over year, and they'll be out working hard to keep all the kind of the common areas up to snuff. And then Brad Clausen, who's sitting over there in the left-hand corner, will be watching you. So we just ask everybody to tidy up.
Mike, I'd just like to say one other thing, and that's about the water level at Tuttle Creek. And it is not a time to panic, but it is something that our citizens should start paying attention to. That's the water level. The water is up in the overflow. It's got several feet to go yet before it gets to the gates, but it is something that we need our community to be aware of and not just not talk about it much. So we've asked the city manager to make sure that we talk about that water level at an upcoming, I think it's city county meeting. And so they'll be asking someone from the Corps of Engineers to visit with us, but you know, we don't have a microphone at those meetings, and so we don't speak to the public. So I'd just like to make sure that we as a community are paying attention to the possibilities.
Thank you. We'll move now to item 5, which is consent agenda. And these are items that are either housekeeping in nature or the commission has considered before. And any commissioner has the option on any item to move that to the end for further discussion if they so wish. So I'm now open for any discussion on consent agenda.
Mayor, I'm interested in moving moving item H, which is North Manhattan Avenue Phase 3A street improvements to the end of the agenda. And specifically, it's with regard to the expenditure of economic development funds, $500,000 toward this $2 million project. And it involves paving from Research Drive, there where you go into the Department of Agriculture, to Baker's Way, just by way of couching it for you.
Okay. Any other comments on consent? Now to entertain a motion for approval, with exception of H. Oh, sorry, yeah. Now ask for a public comment on the consent agenda. So any of those items on the consent agenda, if you have a comment or something else you'd like to discuss on that, please come forward. All right, hearing none, we'll entertain a motion.
I move we approve the consent agenda and move item H to end of the general agenda.
Second.
Mayor Dodson,
Yes?
Commissioner Reddy. Yes. Commissioner Butler.
Yes.
Commissioner McKee.
Yes.
Commissioner Morse.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
So we'll now move to item 6, which is the general agenda, and first consider item A, which is to consider the first reading of an ordinance establishing licensing requirements and regulations for massage therapy establishments and massage therapists. And Jared Wassinger will be the presenter.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. Mayor, as you mentioned, this is considering the first reading of an ordinance licensing massage therapy establishments in the city limits, as well as individual massage therapists. Just want to give you a little background on how we got here today. Kind of came from two approaches. One from a couple of our city commissioners, particularly Commissioner Morris and Commissioner Reddy, attended a human sex trafficking concert or a conference back in the fall of 2018. And one of the recommendations out of that was licensing massage therapy establishments and massage therapists in cities. Kansas is one of only 2 states that doesn't license massage therapists at the state level. And the absence of that license and inspection can lead to some illicit activity in certain communities. As we mentioned, human sex trafficking, sexual assault, and other illicit activities. Our Riley County Attorney, Barry Wilkerson, he also urged the commission through a letter requesting that an ordinance in Manhattan be passed. So over this time, we have met internally with our CPD, Riley County Attorney, as well as practitioners in the public in the city of Manhattan, both massage therapy establishment owners and operators, as well as therapists themselves. So after we kind of got that direction from the commission, we had an initial public meeting in September of 2018. We really kind of went into some broad detail about what other cities in Kansas have been doing. There's quite a handful of cities in Kansas who have adopted such ordinances in the Kansas City area and Wichita in particular. And they've done this to curb that illicit activity, and then as well protect kind of the health, safety, and welfare of the general public, as well as massage therapy practitioners. So we brought that feedback from that public meeting to a work session in October, and we really asked a few specific questions. One, do you want to consider an ordinance here in the future to adopt? And then we also went into some specifics as in regards to where massage therapy can be practiced. We went into detail about daily registers, hotel rooms, in-home establishments. So over the course of the winter and into the spring, we met again internally with city staff, city attorney's office, our code services division staff, customer service staff, as well as RCPD, to really draft an ordinance that we could present to practitioners for their feedback. And we did that in March. And we got a lot of good feedback at that meeting that was last week. We even cleaned up some of the provisions from that meeting and then brought you the ordinance that you're considering tonight. Just to give you a little breakdown of the ordinance structure, those first couple pages we go into some definitions. I'm not going to go over those in detail and specific, but if you have a question about a definition as it comes up throughout the PowerPoint, please let me know. We go into exceptions, so these are basically establishments or individuals who would be exempt from this ordinance. It lists in detail quite a few: daycare providers, medical facilities, people licensed under a different profession in the Board of Healing Arts at the state level, as well as those practicing barbering or cosmetology as licensed under the state Board of Cosmetology. Then it breaks down into really 2 separate licenses. So we're licensing 2 different things here. We're licensing massage therapy establishments, which is kind of the brick and mortar business where that practice can occur. It goes into the application process, how it's issued, operational regulations, as well as inspection. And we'll go into detail with that later this evening. And then we also separately license massage therapists. So that's the individual person who is practicing massage therapy in the community. And it goes through a similar application and issuance process. There's also educational requirements that a therapist would have to meet in order to practice, as well as renew their license. And there is similar operational regulations. We have the effective date in there as August 1st if this passes first and second reading. And really that is going to give city administration time to just develop the applications and then communicate and educate the public to get those forms out in front of them so that they can be licensed by August 1st. I discussed a little bit at the beginning of what we kind of discussed at the last work session, which was permitted locations where and where not to allow massage therapy establishments. This ordinance essentially allows it in all those areas we discussed back in October. So the massage therapy establishment itself, which is the brick and mortar facility, off-site massage therapy, which is essentially any business or residential premise where the patron is asking for massage therapy services. That would include hotel rooms. We did note back in October that there were a couple of cities across Kansas who didn't allow massage therapy to occur in hotel rooms. When we had our public meetings and then additional meetings just with individuals in the community, they noted that it's a very common practice to go to hotel rooms, whether you have a traveling athlete, a traveling individual visiting our community, and they need massage therapy services, so they come to their hotel room. So we included that, and it's basically allowed. And then we talked about home occupations. There is some concern from other cities when they address this in their ordinance of whether or not to allow, you know, if I was a massage therapist, having it in my residential home being my practice, kind of like a home occupation. So we do in fact allow that if you meet applicable code and zoning. That was kind of a debate. We talked about grandfathering in, but we also just kind of in our public meetings, we realized the benefit to allowing massage therapists to continue to practice in the community, even if they are no longer working in a massage therapy establishment. So we didn't want to deter that from occurring in our community. Just going into the license application and issuance for massage therapy establishments. So these next few slides are just going to be detailed toward establishments. There's going to be a licensee, and that would be one individual person. That could be the owner, primary stakeholder in a massage therapy establishment. That's one individual who's going to file an application for a biennial license. That's every 2 years, and that's going to be a $200 fee, as well as a background check fee, and that's going to be a separate from the $200 fee, because we contract our customer service when they process these applications. We contract with a third party to run our background checks, and if that fee ever changes or fluctuates, we wouldn't need to go back into the ordinance and amend the fee structure. The fee is there to cover staff time from customer service to process the application. They need to go into verification of the driver's license, checking all the information that's on the application, as well as there's a requirement that we'll discuss later that upon issuance, before issuance of a license, you need to be inspected by a code official. So a code official will stop by and inspect your premises to ensure that you meet the code, all code and zoning laws in the city, but as well that you're not violating any provision of the ordinance. There's a list of kind of some specific details that the application is going to require be included, but one of them is a list of the operators of the establishment. So, and there's a definition there of someone who is an operator, but that's to ensure there is a provision in there that an operator is there at all times. And if you are listed as an operator, you are not going to be under the background check. You will have to provide all that personal identification information, but you will have to kind of make a statement under oath in the application that you don't violate any of these issuance provisions that I'm going to go over with you. So in order to be issued a license, you have to meet certain requirements. So you must be 18 years of age or older. You can't be a registered sex offender, and you cannot have any convictions of felony or crime involving moral turpitude in the last 5 years. And we define moral turpitude. I'll just jump to the next slide because I know we had discussions about this in October and some concerns. Just to give you a little education before we kind of jump into this discussion, we looked at multiple ordinances and the requirements that would need to be met. And this was basically mirrored from Wichita's ordinance, but we really, from the city's perspective, city administration didn't necessarily have a strong opinion either way, but we wanted to speak with RCPD because they were going to be the ones who were going to be, and Riley County Attorney, they were going to be the ones who were looking at this from the illegal practice perspective and stopping crime. So this was the summary that it went into. It goes into a list of sex-related crimes, but then it also goes into other felonies. And Commissioner McKee, I know you mentioned felonies related to drugs. So this is the list that it currently has. I didn't know if commissioners had any questions before we move on.
I still have some questions. First, is this just like directly taken out of Kansas statute, or is this did we make this unique to us at all? Because there's a couple in there that I don't like. Adultery, that's against the law. Like, I really, if a spouse cheats on another spouse, I'm not sure that that's something we're overly concerned about when licensing a massage therapist. Obviously, a lot of the other things on that list are important, but that's even against the law?
Katie, I'd have
Yeah, I can answer that. That Article 55 of Chapter 1, that is in the Kansas state law, and the list of crimes before that reference are in Kansas state law and are prohibited by state law. So everything listed there is currently unlawful in Kansas as defined by those state laws. I mean, the state laws define those offenses.
So does our offenses, I mean, the offenses we list have to be the same as the state law? I guess
No.
that's my question.
So
Okay.
the city commission can make changes.
I don't know, there's just some of it that's, or even like what does soliciting for immoral purposes mean? It's kind of a broad clause as well.
Let me pull up the statute just a second. It'll take me a second
Okay.
to get.
I don't know. It just makes me wonder if,
So-
like, I understand the point that we're trying to do, and obviously it's really important. I just wonder if we can tighten up that language at all.
So
Because I don't like when people are forced out by catch-alls or something like
Yep.
that.
My understanding is the reasoning behind the inclusion of these related offenses is because these related offenses, if you do the study, would kind of lead to those sex-related crimes and illicit business practices that this ordinance is trying to prevent. The commission does now, tonight, have the opportunity to cross off any of those if they'd like to prior to second reading, if there's any consensus among the commission to do that. We could also kind of defer to RCPD during public comment if they have any feedback on this as well.
One of the operable phrases here is charged with. So
Yes.
adultery by itself is not disqualifying, but it being charged with an adultery, I assume before the court, is that what that means?
But you can be charged with adultery?
This is the definition section. Under the ordinance, you're only precluded from getting the license if you're convicted of these offenses, not being charged with.
Okay.
So you have to be convicted in order for whatever offenses you decide to list. You have to be convicted of those offenses in order for them to preclude you from getting the license. So the charges is in the definition, but the ordinance requires conviction.
Within the last 5 years.
Okay. So, okay.
So in the first line, crimes involving moral turpitude includes convictions for, then the litany of, rather than charges, because that was your question.
Yeah, so the section under issuing a license,
Yeah.
and this is not the definition section, this is the section under issuing a license. It says that you can't be issued a license if you've been convicted of
Convicted, okay.
one of those crimes, a felony or
This is
a
just the
crime
slide.
involving moral turpitude.
This is just the slide we're seeing?
This
Okay.
slide is just the definition, so you understand what
Yeah.
a crime involving moral turpitude entails. If there aren't any other questions related to that, I'll jump into operational regulations. This is kind of a longer section, but it just goes into detail of what is required of an establishment. We mentioned that an operator needed to be on premise. This is just a kind of a list of some of the ones worth noting that have been in the discussions and people have brought up in our public meetings, and we've worked with them on. Hours, this was kind of consistent among other cities in Kansas. You can't operate between midnight and 6 a.m. No alcohol. I have an asterisk up there because if in the event that you have a massage therapy practice as an accessory to a larger, possibly a spa is what a lot of people think of, and you offer alcohol and are licensed to do so, you just can't be consuming or providing alcohol within the massage therapy premises. There's provisions related to the attire of staff members and that's a clean, non-transparent clothing covering the chest, buttocks, and genital areas. And then it also goes into other sanitation, which is clean sheets and towels and those nature. There's also a requirement that there can't be any contact to the pubic, regional, genitals, perineum, or anal region, as well as any contact that would intend to arouse or gratify sexual desires. Talking about rights of entry and inspection. So as we stated earlier, in order to be issued a license, you're going to have to be inspected by a member of our Code Services Division in order to ensure that you're meeting all applicable codes and zoning, as well as meeting the requirements of the ordinance. It also allows any employee of Riley County Police Department, and these inspections of course are during business hours. It doesn't allow a code official or an RCPD employee to do an inspection outside of business hours, but the intent of the ordinance is so that either of these two officials should be allowed that entry upon request to inspect compliance of the ordinance.
Are building codes different if I'm looking at a business versus a house? Like, if are building codes different for like a building per se, like Civic Plus versus a regular house, or a Taco Bell versus a house? I ask, are the codes that you'll be inspecting for in a regular massage therapy business the same as you would for a home business?
I would probably defer to Brad. He can come on up because he's going to be the one overseeing that inspection.
In answer to your question, Commissioner, we already inspect several of these businesses anyway, already as part of our annual inspections. Most of the time, there's not really anything, you'd have to start getting into some fairly big business type buildings. The Civic Plus you mentioned would start to trigger some, just because of the size of the building, would start to trigger some fire suppression alarm type requirements maybe, or things like that. But generally speaking, for a home-based business, there's probably not too much additional. That's as long as there's no drastic electrical or HVAC safety issues. There's exiting. They may need to add a fire extinguisher, let's say, or something like that.
So essentially, a business and a strip mall, let's say a massage therapy in a strip mall, is going to be held to the same standard as massage therapy in a house.
We're probably already inspecting those already anyway. So if they've been constructed appropriately when the business went in the building, they've probably already met the code requirements. As long as the building's been maintained and the safety exit signs, emergency lighting, that kind of thing's been maintained in there, there shouldn't be any issue.
I'm thinking more from the perspective of the home business.
From a home occupancy, yeah, those are gonna be small enough that they're probably not going to trigger any kind of additional requirements, with maybe a few exceptions, like I said, with extinguishers and some things like that, potentially. Okay. But if we haven't been in those before, there could be some things with respect to, just the electrical, mechanical systems in the building we might run across, but that would be no different than any other building we're inspecting, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Brad. So the code inspections would be with the biennial issuance of the license, and then really any inspection on the premises from RCPD or code is likely going to be based off of complaint. So if someone receives a complaint that they think the ordinance is being violated, that's probably going to trigger an inspection. So I'm going to jump now to massage therapists. So this is the individual license. The structure is very similar to the therapist. It's an individual application. It's a biennial license, and it's a $75 fee plus the background check fee. This fee was very similar to other cities in Kansas and their ordinance. It's also very similar to the legislation that's been proposed at the state level to license massage therapy for the last 8 years or so, or possibly more. So that's pretty consistent with that fee and other fees. You're required to, again, provide that personal information, photo ID, past employment, and then it goes through the issuance provisions again, just like the licensee for the massage therapy establishment as it relates to age, being a registered sex offender, and then convictions of felonies or crimes involving moral turpitude. We go into educational requirements in this ordinance. So a massage therapist in the community is going to need to meet one of these in order to satisfy being issued a license. It goes into I'm going to talk about first these 4 bullets right here, and it's related to the NBLEX. So that's just a national exam that a board of Massage Therapists Association provides massage therapists across the country. So you can have sat and passed for that exam in order to meet the educational requirement. There's also the NCTMB exam, which is not offered anymore. So you could have taken that prior to 2015, and we would allow that to meet the educational requirement. You can also meet it through attending a massage therapist school and providing an official transcript showing 500 hours from that school. It doesn't need to be the original copy, but it does need to be a copy of the official transcript. In our discussions with other massage therapists during our public meetings, we came across a lot of individuals who didn't possibly meet that first 3 set of requirements. Schooling in massage therapy has changed over time, so people who've been practicing in the profession for a long, extended period of time, didn't attend school when there was 500-hour programs, or they've just been practicing for so long that they didn't need to or was ever required to take some of these exams. So there is a threshold of less schooling, and this is a provision that you have to meet all 3 of these requirements, which is 150 credit hours from a massage therapist school, 12 continuing education credits in the last 5 years, and then being a member of a nationally recognized massage therapy association. So there are, again, members in our community and people who've been practicing for a long time that still don't meet some of these requirements. So this is kind of a provision that if this is adopted and goes into effect on August 1st, you would need to, if you can't meet one of those 4 requirements, I'm on the last bullet below the "or," and that would be you would need to provide a sworn statement saying that you've been practicing in the community for the last continuously for the last 5 years. You would also need a sworn statement from another massage therapist essentially vouching for you, and then you would also need to provide some proof of documentation, whether that be tax returns or tax receipts, that you've been practicing. This was a provision we found in a couple other cities who were probably dealing with the same problem. So this would only apply within 60 days of the effective ordinance. So 2 years from now, if someone came to the community, they would need to meet one of those first 4 educational requirements. There is a provision within the ordinance regarding continuing education requirements. This is in some other city ordinances. There's also, this was in the proposal of the state laws over the last few years to require continuing education to ensure that people massaging massage therapy and practicing massage therapy are keeping up to date with the profession and continuing their education in order to ensure safety, and they're providing in the right manner. So the requirement is 12 hours of continuing education through each biennial license renewal, and you have to get those 12 credit hours from accredited institution of massage therapist school or one of those recognized massage therapy national associations. There was a majority of support among folks at the public meeting to include this requirement. That they see the benefit of it. They see not only the individual benefit of it, but they see the benefit from the practitioner or massage therapy as a whole in the community, so that people are meeting certain standards. Operational regulations are very similar regarding hours of operation, alcohol, clothing, and contact. There is one provision in here regarding the age of the patron who's requesting massage therapy. So if you are 16 or 17, you need parental consent in order to receive massage therapy from a massage therapist. If you are 15 and below, you would need parental presence and authorization or legal guardian. So this is one of my last slides, and it's related to the daily register requirement, and this is a requirement for both therapists and establishments. So for establishments, you need to essentially have two registers, we'll say, and one is a current list of all your massage therapists who are practicing in your facility for your business. And then you also need a daily register of patrons who are receiving massage therapy in your practice. And the requirements are just 4 requirements. It's name, address of the patron, phone number, the time of the therapy, and then the therapist who is actually providing it. So I guess it's 5 requirements. That same requirement is for individual therapists, so they need to keep their own daily register of the patrons that they're working on. Both of these for establishments and therapists would be open to inspection under this ordinance by an employee of RCPD. Originally, the ordinance had included code officials. We just decided to remove that after getting feedback from practitioners that really this is only for investigative purposes in the event that a complaint of a crime or a violation of this ordinance occurs, so that a member of RCPD can investigate the issue and find some clarity. There have been comments from practitioners over both of our public meetings that we had related to HIPAA and whether or not they are covered under HIPAA, and this inspection is a violation of HIPAA. It's our opinion of staff and RCPD that it is not a violation of HIPAA. RCPD is going to, there are many exceptions with HIPAA, and one of them is public safety and law enforcement. And this is just an inspection, so it would be held within the report from RCPD. It would be kept confidential, and it wouldn't be released to anyone through an open records request or anyone requesting that from the public. I will add too that at our last public meeting related to this, it was brought up about what I put in quotes called the 10-minute chair, which is essentially some massage therapy establishments or massage therapists, they will hold these 10-minute chair events at businesses. So if you have a business of 100 employees and you hire a massage therapist to come to your business and just offer 10-minute, relaxation or therapeutic massages for your employees, they felt that the log or the register was kind of overbearing. And speaking with staff in our legal department, we felt like removing that from the daily register provision would be very difficult to define and distinguish between when these type of events are occurring and when they're not. You can also, you don't have to be taking the register as it's occurring throughout the day. I know some businesses you have sign-ups, so you can just get that sign-up afterwards to ensure that you have that log, or then of course if that isn't occurring, you can either write those 5 requirements down or ask the patron to do that as well. That covers the ordinance, so we can go into questions or we can open it up to public comment. That's up to you guys.
Maybe before you leave, I think at the end of each session, you've kind of summarized whether or not you had kind of the majority opinion from all the groups you met with. Is that generally true for everything you've presented, with the exception of this 10-minute chair?
Yeah, so really the only thing that, there have been members of our public meetings who have been opposed to certain provisions throughout this ordinance, but yeah, in general, we've had over 20 people, at each public meeting in attendance of these. There's over 35 massage therapy establishments generally in the city, and I've reached out to all of them, to my knowledge, to ensure that they've had the opportunity to be here tonight or be at any of these public meetings. Generally, this provision, I guess, has been the most controversial, but there have been members who, you know, they're okay with taking it, but it's that inspection that is, you know, they're okay with doing the register and keeping this stuff, but their concern is the inspection and what could occur in that event.
The, on your, probably about the fourth slide, it's titled Massage Therapy Permitted Locations. When I read the word permitted, that had a different connotation when I was reading this beforehand. Permitted can be substituted with the word allowed, I assume?
Yes.
Because permitted to me means you have a permit. So I don't know how the ordinance, I can't remember how that's written.
I guess
but-
if to avoid any confusion, if you were a massage therapy establishment, or if you had a home-based occupation business, you would need a massage therapy establishment license.
Yeah,
If you were just a therapist and you're providing off-site massage therapy, and you're just an individual providing that, then you would just need the individual license to provide that.
well, the second bullet is what caught my attention, if it was permitting, so. On the next slide, when we talked about cost, I know some of us had talked about, maybe we looked at 20 other ordinances or so of this kind, and the fees ran between $100 and $300.
And most of them were annual.
Yeah. The other thing, you know, I understand the relationship here of this cost to an initial licensing, but a subsequent license, if this is renewed, is that the idea here? Are they renewed every 2 years?
Yeah, you would need to renew the license
Yeah.
every 2 years, and that cost would be the same.
So,
The process would also be the same. You would be inspected every 2 years, and then the staff time to process those applications would still need to occur.
okay, yeah, I was just trying to figure out why it would be the cost if you're just continuing a license, but if you're doing the inspection at the same time, that's, makes sense. I think I had one more in here. So everybody's on board with this continuing education part?
I would say a majority of those in attendance at our public meetings were in favor of it. There were a few who,
And on your second to the
that
last, the
that
daily
wasn't needed.
register. If you're a therapist in an establishment, are we calling for both to do it, or just the establishment to do it? Because I'm thinking like of a big barber shop or beauty shop. Essentially, the shop assigns a person to a beautician, for example. So, I mean, the record would be in the front rather than having
the
them
reason
do it.
that, one of the reasons that we provide or we require this provision for both the establishment and the therapist is you could be a massage therapist who works in an establishment but then also provides outside services to other people outside of that specific business. So
well, that
in that
part-
event, you're required to have your own personal
Right.
log.
That part I understand. I mean, if you're not in an establishment, but it seems to me if you're in an establishment, we could find an easier way to do that. Then, I don't know what would be so difficult about breaking out these massage chairs. I mean, that to me is, there's no person, I don't know much about it, but it doesn't seem to me there's a person touching you other than that helping you sit down or something, right?
No, so this is you sitting down on a chair and a massage therapist providing massage therapy to
Okay,
you.
so it's not just sitting in the chair, it's,
No, yeah, they call it a 10-minute chair because essentially, you could set up an office or a conference room in your business, set up a massage chair, and then people could sign up and come in and out and get a quick 10-minute massage.
I was thinking about one of these chairs that essentially does.
Yeah, so
that would've been a
if it's
nightmare at
just,
Civic Plus.
I know at Civic Plus, I think they might have some of those massage chairs. That is exempt from the ordinance, so.
Okay.
that's
Now, I'm
not
thinking
required.
about the one that's in the lobby of the mall or in the airport, so, yeah. All right.
I just wanted to say, I think, Linda and I went to the public meeting, and it was great to have so much input and to have the modifications that were mentioned. I think it was modified in several key areas, and I don't want us to forget the main reason for doing this was because of the human trafficking conference. When we went there, they were discussing how sex trafficking was happening in massage therapy units and that were not licensed, and the state of Kansas does not have any kind of process in this place. So we wanted to be a little bit more proactive. We don't have a problem right now that we know of, but other cities do. So I think we got a lot of people on board, professional folks that are in massage therapy businesses that want something, and I think we worked closely with them. So the key part is the RCPD being involved in, if they felt something was going on, that they would be able to have access to records. That's where Barry Wilkerson also spoke to this issue. That was their reason for being involved in this, not to make it burdensome for any businesses. And so I think they provided great feedback. I think you and Katie and several members that worked with you modified it really well. I would like to see the rest of the comments. As for the 10-minute chairs, what I heard them say was that they don't typically do a sign-in because they felt the people who were getting these at these events might be feeling like they were going to be solicited afterwards, so they tried to take that away from it. So there's no, in some of them, they don't do sign-ins. So these are just public events, and because they were public, it wouldn't be an establishment that's licensed. So I don't know how we can.
There wouldn't be anything to prevent a massage therapy establishment or a massage therapist to note, up front that they won't be using this information to solicit marketing or anything like that.
Well,
So
I think that's up to judgment, because people get you. I mean, I sign up for things all the time where I don't want people to call me, and they still call me. So things like that, I think that was what I heard from why they didn't want to do it in those areas. I'm not sure, since we are trying to work with our CPD and our district attorney on this, to also get their input on how they feel about that and how we should get that incorporated in there, along with the rest of the ordinance. And, I look forward to the feedback.
yep.
Okay, thanks, Jared.
You bet.
Now move to any public comment on this issue. Anyone wishing to make a comment, please come forward. We'd also ask you to sign in. You can do that after you finish speaking if you like.
My name's Doug Sellers. I own Body First, CEO, and also a massage therapist. Kind of give a background on me. I was completely against the register for easy access. I have HIPAA concerns. The main thing that it was for the code official, because they were not governed by anything, and I believe whatever a code official finds is public knowledge. And so if they have that documentation, I don't want it to be public. RCPD, I believe, is under association to HIPAA as well. So that one's better, but I'm still questioning the HIPAA. Question on it is the background check fee, is it per operator?
There is no fee. The operator's just the license.
Just the license itself, okay. The other thing that I think needs to be clarified is inspections when there is a client in the room, because there's nothing in there that specifically says that. I don't want our sessions interfered with because they have open access to our facilities to come in whenever they want to inspect. Because that's, again, then we'd have HIPAA problems and privacy problems. So I think that needs to be addressed in this. Other than that, I like how everything was changed.
Thank you, appreciate it. It's Neil.
My name is Neil Horton. I am an owner of a salon and spa here in Manhattan along with my wife and daughter. I'm just the spokesperson. I wanted to thank the commissioners for their attentiveness to this issue and working with us since last fall to kind of work through some of the details on the ordinance here. But I would like to call your attention to your memo that you were presented tonight and a little bit of the information that's been given to you there. Looks like there's been an attempt to license at the state level since 2012. And last Wednesday when they had the public meeting, there was some comments about that. And the question really was, what happens if a state licensing effort comes into play? And I believe it was Commissioner Morris who said that it's really been the commission, the city's practice, that if something like that would happen, the city would probably rescind their ordinance and let that regulation at the state level take place. I think that's been a practice in the city for other similar things that have taken place. So I applaud that recognition that if there's a state licensing procedure in place, that the city takes a step back from that same effort. And with that thought in mind, I would like to talk about the licensing of cosmetology facilities, because that's really what most salon and spas in Manhattan are really operating under, is a state cosmetology license. I believe that the very first sentence in the ordinance, where it says, whereas the state of Kansas does not license or regulate massage therapy establishments, the inverse of that statement would be that if there is a licensing procedure, that you're not interested in getting involved in any more regulation at the city level. And if you go on into the ordinance, I believe it's page 3 where it talks about the exemptions. The first paragraph A and B both talk about facilities that I would make the assumption are licensed by the state of Kansas. Medical care facilities, adult care facilities, all of those are licensed at that state level, and again would be exempt from your licensing procedure on this ordinance. And you go further in subparagraph F there to actually exempt the person performing the service if they're licensed in cosmetology. But you do not exempt the facility. And so not only do our employees have a cosmetology license, but the business also holds a cosmetology license. I believe that should be an exempt facility, a massage therapy. And I use that word with a little disdain because I don't think we are a massage therapy establishment. I think we're a salon and spa, just like we hold the license for. So I'd like, my request is that you exempt any establishment that holds a cosmetology license from the ordinance, as well as the operators that work in that establishment. To Brad's point a little bit ago about inspections, we are inspected once a year by the code department at our place of business, and subject to inspections at any time by the State Board of Cosmetology, and we see them regularly. So that's my request, and I hope you give it thoughtful consideration.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Good evening. My name is Michael Patillo. I'm a relatively recent resident of Manhattan. I've been practicing massage therapy for 10 years. I'm a nationally board certified therapist with advanced training in 3 different massage modalities. I've worked at massage establishments as well as developed 2 different private practices, one within a home office and one within a leased office space. I have serious concerns about the scope, severity, and enforceability of the proposed ordinance in its current iteration. I believe it's unnecessarily punitive to new therapists beginning a practice and also would discourage experienced therapists from joining the local massage community. It's unclear to me that there is sufficient evidence of a direct link between the provisions of the ordinance and the potential disruption of human trafficking and prostitution. Comparisons have been made to the City of Wichita massage ordinance, which passed in 2016 under similar supposed justifications. In the 3 years since its passing, I was only able to find evidence of one case of a questionable massage establishment closed due to prostitution, despite over 37 compliance checks conducted in 2016. Further, despite the ordinance being in effect, it still took Wichita Police 5 months to make an arrest in that particular case. In 2015, police conducted 24 investigations and arrested 22 people on suspicion of human trafficking at massage establishments, according to Wichita city documents. If Wichita is the example upon which this council is basing some, if not most, of its argument for an ordinance, the reasoning is less than convincing. Situations of human trafficking can be difficult to separate from sex work, which this ordinance does not even propose to do. And the result is often that the victim is arrested while those truly responsible go free. Placing the responsibility or blame upon one industry, in this case massage therapy, does nothing to address the systemic issues or the individual perpetrators of human trafficking. My observations of last week's meeting were mainly that the council lacks enough understanding and expertise of the massage therapy industry to adequately address practitioner and establishment needs. As we witnessed in that discussion, there are many different aspects involved in running a successful massage therapy practice that the city must more fully understand before it can implement any regulations that are effective rather than destructive. I think that the example of the chair massage questions tonight is a good example of this. I strongly urge the city to establish a task force or working group built from a diverse pool of massage practitioners, police and city officials, and perhaps even human trafficking experts to examine these issues further before implementing any regulatory ordinance. Finally, this ordinance does nothing to protect either massage therapists providing legitimate and needed services or those who are most vulnerable to trafficking. Council members have stated that the intent is not to harm massage therapists or massage establishments, but the fact is that this ordinance will do just that. Let's not address a few bad apples by burning down the whole orchard. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we'll close the public comment and come back to the commission. Any further thoughts?
I have a couple more questions. One of them is based off Neil's comment. Why didn't we? I'm sure we explored it, or did we explore it? Why didn't we exempt cosmetology facilities?
So, the Board of Cosmetology does not oversee or license the aspect of the actual application of massage therapy. The individual license in cosmetology deals with what is that of cosmetology, and when it comes to salon, it goes into some details in relations to, you know, if you go to get a haircut, you can get a neck massage. But under that provision and that exemption, that in of itself wouldn't require a massage therapy establishment. It's when you actually provide massage therapy based on that definition. in the
So is what
ordinance.
you just referred to, the one exemption, is...
We're looking at F.
Yeah, so what is that provision referring to?
So that would refer to a salon or a spa or a cosmetology practice if they're licensed through the state under the Board of Cosmetology and they're practicing under the realm of that license and not leading into the actual practice of massage therapy that's defined in the
So
ordinance.
essentially, it's saying when I go to sports clips and they wash my hair and kind of massage my head as they're washing, that doesn't require. But if they do a full-fledged massage therapy program, they would have to be licensed.
Yes.
Okay. That's
I know that you've had some editing as a result of the concerns of the massage therapist, but I noticed as you go from page 5 to 6, there is no F. We've skipped it, so G, I suppose, ought to be F. Just by way of clarifying. I attended the sex trafficking conference last year, and Yusha and I talked with the county attorney and said, so how does our ordinance stack up against the rest of the communities in the state? And he said, you don't have one. And so in my mind, I was after a reasonable ordinance. I don't want an overly restrictive one. I think Overland Park is the most restrictive one in the state, unless you have another opinion, Jared. Just based on a young woman that I know that moved to Overland Park. I know that it is also hard to go from no regulation to something. So I'm trying to go from nothing to reasonable, and that would be my rationale. I know that we are situated close to interstate with a major state university and a major military post on either side of us. And I think the potential here is significant. It can be troubling. So I want us as a community, there are 15, 20 other cities that have adopted ordinances, and each one finds their own way. In the absence of state guidance or state regulation of some kind, it seems to me that we regulate cosmetologists, we regulate barbers, fingernail and toenail technicians. It seems to me that massage therapists should also be regulated because they do tend to massage our bodies, and it's a fine. And I want I've talked with some therapists who say we want to be a respected occupation, and I know that you as individuals have worked with other therapists around the state trying to get the state to pass something, and they just have not. And so as far as I'm concerned, this is an interim measure on our part. Katie, when we think about the state, if the state were to adopt an ordinance, do we get out of the way? Do we rescind? Do we need to put something in this ordinance about that?
Katie, if I may, so the House bill,
Yeah.
I think it's 2184 that was proposed this legislative session, it included a provision that preempted any city from licensing individual therapists.
Okay.
So I think that provision has been within the ones that have been considered. That one did not preempt cities from licensing establishments.
Yeah.
But for the individual therapist, it didn't allow. So in that case, we would have had to repeal it. But
So it depends on the legislation. Yeah.
It does, and in the past iterations of the bill with that language in there, the League of Kansas Municipalities opposed the legislation because of that provision, not because the league has a position on whether or not cities should regulate it, but to allow the cities individually to determine whether they want to continue to regulate it, just to retain that decision for the cities. I think that's important because if you look at the history of it, cities have opposed it for that, because of that provision. Again, it would be a decision that the city would make if a state law is adopted on the terms of the law and what the will of the commission was at that time. And the law, as Jared said, the law may prevent us from doing that, and so then we would repeal it. But if the decision remains, the commission at the time would evaluate whether to continue the program or not locally.
And we have both small cities and large cities that have adopted ordinances that they believe are adapted to their particular communities. I do support the idea of a registry, but I also could envision it being as simple as a calendar notation. When I go to my dentist or my doctor, they put my name on the calendar and they have a record that I had a 10:30 appointment, and so it seems to me that it's doable, and it is a minimal, you're asking minimal information. It seems important to know who your clients are. I also have appreciated the compromises that the city administration has made, because we started out with using a model piece of legislation. Here, this is what some other cities, or the model legislation, and based upon the input from the massage therapists, you have modified this legislation, took out a couple of chunks, as I recall, so that we wouldn't have the issue. And especially, there were two things the county attorney wanted. He wanted us to take massage therapy out of hotels and take it out of homes. Well, here we are tonight recommending that it continue on in both, but we are licensing the therapists and licensing the location. So to me, we're controlling for some of that. And so for that reason, this seems very reasonable to me. And I plan to support it.
Yeah, I think, at that discussion last week, it seems like so long ago. And before last week, there was previous discussions when Kyle Mangus was here. So there was a cohort of businesses, massage therapists, and RCPD attorney, district attorney, city officials at the table even last year. So this has been in progress for almost 6 to 8 months now. And at that time, there was a consensus for some type of regulation. We didn't know what it would look like, but from the business sector, they wanted some type of regulation, because I remember one of the business owners saying she has a professional business, and next door, a couple of doors away, she knew something shady was going on, and she didn't know what to do about it, but it was kind of also in the same massage therapy area. So I think that was there was a lot of people that wanted some kind of regulation. And when we had the discussion last week, I think we took out lots of it, as Commissioner Morris mentioned. I think it's doable, because at that time also, last week also, Director Butler and Kurt Muldrup was there, as well as Barry Wilkerson, for almost 2 hours. And we heard everything. And that was the time we made the decision, maybe we didn't need to be just grandfathering in the home therapists and not have any more. That's when we made a decision. It's okay if somebody transitions into a home massage therapy at that point. And the hotel conversation came up, and the 10-minute chair events came up. So I think we've made the necessary modifications, the fee structure, as well as the daily register, so that we have some kind of enforcement mechanism. The only difference between this and other types of licenses is this would go through our city clerk, I think, because we don't have any other license that goes through a city clerk, because we don't have state that's doing it. This is the first time that I think is going through the city clerk to do it. I think it's necessary. This is something we also talked about maybe having on the website, so when a business becomes licensed, we can have that business on our website so people would know if they're looking for a massage therapist who is licensed and who is not, kind of a red flag, or an indicator of who's there. We talked about if this was to go into effect whenever it goes into effect, maybe having a 6-month education period. So there may be more than 35 or 40. There might be other people that you know of that don't know the process. One thing we don't want to do is penalize somebody for not knowing the process or the ordinance that might be going into effect once it is. So give them some leeway so that they can make the necessary, get the necessary paperwork in, and make it easy. Don't make it too stringent where there's too much paperwork and too many regulations involved as far as just the process of it. Once you do it, you don't have to do it again for another 2 years. So I think that's, I hope that's working for our businesses. And I would like, you know, we may or may not be here in 2 or 3 years, but it would be nice for the city to give some kind of an update, maybe a year after it's been enforced, to see the pros and cons, what worked, what didn't work, so we can tweak that ordinance so it doesn't have to be just the way it is. Maybe some tweaking needs to be done, and we just don't know what that looks like. So I would like to get an update maybe in a year after it's enforced to see what that is.
Just a couple of questions. One of the speakers mentioned, I think he said sex workers. And when he said it, my assumption had been that this was already captured in state law. In other words, it's, when we looked at moral turpitude and so on, it was captured in that definition. Is that essentially true, Katie? Sex workers are not?
Yeah. Prostitution, human trafficking,
Right.
all of those, I believe, fall under that state law.
So it's not that we're not doing anything, it's that it's covered by state law, is that?
Yeah, the extent we go in our ordinance goes into the operational regulations of the contact with the patron
Yeah.
and prevention of that in any way.
Okay. But it's only, ours is only under the realm of therapy, it's not overt,
Yeah.
The other one is, do you have any knowledge if Riley County is doing something similar?
They're not. No. So
You know,
it wouldn't be licensed outside of the city limits of Manhattan.
As Usha and Linda have said, you know, in order for this to be effective, we've got to either have a state law or we've got to get together here with the county and make sure that we're all singing off the same sheet of music.
Actually, both counties, because the city is in the two, yeah. Even Gary, I'd like to appeal to them.
The other one, I'm not quite sure I understand here, which is the one that Neil Horton brought up. I understand the piece about legislation and what it says, determining how we react to it. That is, if the legislation says that no municipality shall override, then obviously that's clear. If it makes no mention of that, then we can modify as we choose. But the part about licensing of, is it cosmetology and spas, or what is the?
So
what
it
does
would
that
be,
mean?
I'll jump to section F, but anyone who has a license issued by the state under barbering or cosmetology practice. So in the event, and this happened the other day, I was on the phone with, you know, I was doing my rounds of calling all of these establishments, and I called one of them, and they had a question about the extent of what they offer. And they only go to the extent of what's within their cosmetology license, which had to deal with, you can provide, you know, neck and facial massage. And they didn't go to into any other full body extent. So they're making the determination that they don't need a license, and they're not going to pursue applying for one.
Well, that would seem to me to make sense. In other words, if they're operating legally, they're already covered, so they should be exempted. If they're operating illegally, then that's another matter.
Katie, did I misspeak?
Well, I think that the issue is an application. I think what Jared said is right, that if the massage is incidental to their services they're providing within the scope of the cosmetology license, we're not going to license them or inspect them. If they have, say, a room that's dedicated to massage therapy as defined in our ordinance, the state's not, and that's all they're doing in that room. So it's not the cosmetologists who are using that room. it's a massage therapist, the way we define it, then the state's not inspecting the operation of that room. And so they would be able to operate that room without any regulation or oversight from the city as to who the massage therapists are, who the patrons are. And so while the premises as a whole may be inspected and their other operations may be inspected in that particular configuration we're talking about, there would be no inspection or regulation of that area that's if it were reserved solely for massage therapy. And the concern that that law enforcement and very expressed to staff was they don't want to set up a loophole basically where a salon or some other type of business that's otherwise regulated could have that operation in its own area and not have law enforcement being able to give that same oversight there as it would next door in a place that calls itself a massage establishment. That's something that law enforcement may want to weigh in more on, but it's because that particular use would not be regulated by the state if it's in that reserved area. And the city wouldn't be by the way, wouldn't be inspecting or regulating the cosmetology activities either. The city's not going to be looking into that. All we would do is go inspect that room or whatever area is dedicated to the massage therapy. So I guess it's not an overlap in that sense, depending on the way they have it set up.
I guess I don't know enough about this, so I have to ask another question. That is, do they just come and inspect the premises, or are they inspecting and issuing a license to the name that's on the marquee?
My understanding is they issue the establishment, and then if you're a licensed cosmetologist, you have an individual license. So there's I think,
but I mean,
I'm just referring to what I remember from a public meeting, but they said that they have a $50 establishment license for their spa at the state for under cosmetology.
Let me phrase this a different way. If I have a business called Business X, and they come and they license me, do they not know that I have a Business X and a Business Y under the same marquee?
I guess what you're referring to is if Business X is the cosmetology practice and Business Y is the massage therapy. In most cases, they're still just referred to as Business X, but when the state comes and licenses them and inspects them, they're only inspecting and enforcing the laws as it relates to their definitions of cosmetology and nothing to do with massage therapy. In the event that you use a room that you cut hair in, but in that same room you do massage therapy, the state is going to inspect that room because the practice of cosmetology does occur in that specific facility. But if it's separated and it's just massage therapy, the state is not going to inspect that.
Is there anything specific to spas?
That would be under the Board of Cosmetology based off those practices. So hair, nails,
if Genesis,
salon.
for example, has a spa in the back of the gymnasium for massages and things like that, what do we do then?
I would have to know the practice that would be going on at Genesis. They offer full massage therapy at Genesis, so and they employ a massage therapist, so that they would be needed to be licensed. And I've spoken with the folks at Genesis.
There's no specific, I mean, if you've got a licensing structure for cosmetologists, there's no licensing structure for spas or gymnasiums?
They fall under the Board of Cosmetology. Yeah. They do. So Genesis has a license with the Kansas Board of Cosmetology, and I believe it's under the specific cosmetology license. Because under cosmetology, I think you can get like they oversee like spas, cosmetology, nails, tattoos, and a couple other things. So.
I just find that slightly illogical, but maybe I take your word.
So when I did my research to find out as many massage therapy establishments in the community as I could, I cross-referenced the Board of Cosmetology and all of the licensed establishments in Manhattan, and those were some that that came up, and then I went to their website to see the services that they offered.
So the only time that we would go to a marquee that says cosmetology is if they have an adjunct business, which is massage therapy. Is that right?
It's if the massage therapy services, as defined in our ordinance, are being provided on that site.
Right.
I mean, it wouldn't have to be a separate business. And I think the spa term is throwing us off a little bit because the Board of Cosmetology doesn't have a separate spa. It's the way that practitioner or salon owners describe the types of services they offer, because the Board of Cosmetology licenses a wide variety of services. And so some might focus on some types of those services and some might have more. And so they might call themselves a spa because they offer a broader range of services under the Board of Cosmetology. But I think the key here is that the way that we have designed the ordinance is that we're regulating an activity on those premises that is not being regulated by the state of Kansas, and that we have it set up in a way that has regulations relating to how they interact with patrons and sanitation that wouldn't be inspected or provided by the state of Kansas for that activity alone. The state might be investigating it for their other services, but not for that particular one. And so we didn't view it as a duplicate, because ours is a very focused area of activity. It may be all under the same umbrella, but I just want to make clear, like the spa thing is really more of a commercial way to describe the range of services. The Board of Cosmetology would maybe salons, maybe the more common, but that's not to say that they don't do broader things under that umbrella.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Yep.
I would like to hear from RCPD, either Director Butler or Assistant Director Muldrup, about this issue, since this is one of the primary reasons we were looking at an ordinance.
Good evening. The massage therapy ordinance train left the station long before I was appointed director of the RCPD, so I've been playing catch up on the history of this. There's a couple of things I think it's important to mention in terms of especially the register inspection. And I'll use an analogy. You know, recently we heard from a citizen about their concerns regarding speeding on K-18 between Manhattan and I-70. And we do routinely monitor speed in various locations around the city, but now that we have a specific location that has been brought to our attention about a specific issue, we went out there and assessed it, and then we started deploying cars to increase our enforcement efforts, which have resulted in several tickets being issued. On something like this with a daily registry, I know there were some concerns by the operators expressed at last week's meeting concerning intent. And you know, I'm not always going to be the RCP director, so that's a legitimate concern. What's the focus or the emphasis going to be with the next director when they have this kind of authority to go in and inspect? This tool of the daily registry, I want to make clear, I read what the language is very clearly, and I'll let Jared or the city attorney correct me if I'm wrong, but this isn't a registry that's sitting out on a table with all of the patrons' names and phone numbers and addresses listed so every patron that comes in behind them can see that. It says the operator has to maintain a registry and make it available upon request for inspection. And those inspections, in my opinion, would not be an onerous activity that we would engage in on a weekly basis at every establishment that is regulated under this ordinance. But what it would be is a similar approach that I described with the speeding complaint we got. If we get a complaint, and I would imagine that it would be some of the operators in this city that would bring potential violations of the ordinance to our attention by folks that are operating without a license, this registry gives us the authority to make a quick inspection to see if there's a business operating, to see if they're regulated and if they're maintaining their registry. And if not, that's where, as a law enforcement agency, we take a step back and we increase our scrutiny of this operation. just so you know, if we go in and they don't have a registry available, that doesn't mean we start going through the business, opening doors and doing an investigation. We wouldn't have the authority to do that absent of any other exigent information about a crime occurring, a serious felony crime occurring. So by not having the registry available or some other complaint that would bring this to our attention, that's where we would have to group and look at this and maybe start an investigation to see what's going on there. You know, I have resources that are limited, and I have demands on those resources that ebb and flow, and some of those demands for resources are important today, but the issue's addressed, and then we focus on other issues. And that's generally how I look at this. I look at this as we have a reason, other than maybe an annual inspection, to go and ask to view a registry or to investigate some other violation of the ordinance. So it's not my intent that the police department is going to be an overbearing presence in how this ordinance is rolled out. The application process, we won't have a role in that. So the one thing, and I hesitate to speak for the county attorney, but I think you all probably have heard him say this, in the other jurisdictions that have massage therapy ordinances, they say one of the key provisions that if you want it to be effective to prevent human trafficking or identify human trafficking, is you have to have that daily register to allow the police the opportunity to walk into the business and get a quick look to see and make sure that it is operating under the regulations that the city has enacted. And I'll answer any questions you might have. You're welcome.
Any further discussion?
Oh, I was just going to say that one of the things we did also talk about last week was with regard when we, Jared and the city administration removed the provision for the code office to see the registry. We wanted there still to be, so the code office would still require the operator or the therapist to verify that, like a statement of some kind, to verify that they have a registry as part of the application process.
I think that conversation dealt with, you know, that annual inspection where
Right.
if you're inspecting the area, you can ask them if they're, you know, but they don't have the ability to
Right.
inspect that.
But
no.
the code officer
you can't
doesn't
ask them if they're
ask to see it. They make a commitment that they keep a registry, and then if and when the police want or need to see it, they can. So that's the give and take that we've developed.
So I just quickly want to say that I am overall supportive of this. I had a little hesitation as we were going through it and having our conversations earlier in the year. I felt like maybe there were some places where we were giving too many exceptions. With that being said, I think that the final iteration of this is good. The only thing I'd say is I'm still really getting caught up on this moral turpitude language, specifically I mean, like, there's a provision for sodomy in here, which was invalidated by the Supreme Court, and the only reason it's still on the state books is out of principle. And I'm really not principle from some of our leaders, and I'm really not. I don't want to pass on language that was used to prosecute gay men into our language here at a city. So I would really want to see that struck out, and I still don't understand why adultery's in there either, but apparently someone in Junction City in 2017 did get arrested for that, so that's like a thing. But I just, which is it boggles my mind. But I mean, I feel like we could tighten up language a little bit here and be clear about what we're actually trying to go after. But I don't want to pass off language like some of that language that's in there, because I just out of principle, I think it's condemning to some of the communities that live here in Manhattan, but otherwise I'm supportive of the ordinance.
There's no further discussion. We'll entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move we approve first reading of an ordinance adding Article 3 to Chapter 19 of the Code of Ordinances establishing licensing requirements and regulations for massage therapy establishments and massage therapists.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Was there any interest in a modification such as Jared suggested with regard to the language for moral turpitude? This is the time to edit if we, so the state does not license massage therapists, but the state is dictating what we say, their statute says is moral turpitude, but I would think we would have the ability to edit if we wanted to.
Well, my question would be if they, Katie said if they are convicted, so would an employer have, is it justified for an employer to see if they were convicted to ask the question, what were you convicted for? Is that something an employer is allowed to do in hiring? Because how else would you know?
So the way that this would be used for the city's purposes is that when we run the background check, it gives the city the ability to have a list to look at to determine whether someone meets the requirements or not. So that would be the context for the city. This list, I did want to note that the way the ordinance works is if you've been convicted of whatever offenses that you decide to add to the list, the offense can have occurred anywhere. And so probably a better way to describe this earlier would be that these are the offenses that within Kansas are captured under crimes involving moral turpitude. Some of the phrases in there are referencing the way other jurisdictions reference similar crimes. Some of the cities still have ordinances for these things, like soliciting for moral purposes. And so what the other cities that have this similar language have done is they've tried to be as inclusive as possible in terms of they don't want someone where the terminology of the law in another state is a little different to still be able to get the license. That said, anything on here that the commission, there is no legal requirement that this is your list at all. So anything the commission wants to remove, we can remove.
I mean, I don't mean to go on like a personal crusade or tangent here, but I think I would feel a lot better about it if sodomy was just removed. I mean, it's a law that you can't even, the Supreme Court has invalidated, but there are people who still have convictions against them. I just Googled it and read an article about a man in Georgia who still has a conviction from it in the 80s, and it was a law passed to persecute gay men. I mean, it's not addressing what we're trying to prevent here. So while it likely will never affect anybody applying for a massage therapy, license language matters. Whether it's buried in a paragraph or not, language matters, and so I think it should be taken out. So that's all I'm asking us to do.
Well, this is a first reading. So are you suggesting when we come back for the second reading that
It would be gone, yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'm fully supportive of it. I'll stop being angry about adultery because apparently people are still getting prosecuted for it, but sodomy seems ridiculous. It shouldn't be there.
I do want to be cautious of sodomy though, because although you're right, Jared, it does prevail. I mean, there is that sector for certain populations, but it's also addresses a lot of other areas, even with children or with other demographics.
That fall under one of these other crimes. Sodomy is no longer a valid thing that you can persecute somebody for. The Supreme Court invalidated all sodomy laws across the country. It just shouldn't be there.
If we can, let's just take that under advisement for the second reading.
For Katie to interpret between now and then.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
proceed. So if you'll call the roll, please.
Commissioner Reddy,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner McKee,
Yes.
Commissioner Morse,
Yes.
Mayor Dodson.
Yes, but I would like some further consideration on the issue that Neil Horton brought up. I just think there's some things that, at least for me, need to be sorted, but I'll vote yes for the first reading.
Motion carries 5-0.
We'll move to agenda item B, which is to consider the preferred design alternative for the Southeast Neighborhood Recreation Center at Douglas Park. And Jason, you're not presenting, huh? So we'll start with Eddie,
Yes.
and got a supporting cast of,
It will be a supporting cast tonight.
yeah, all right.
Thank you, Mayor,
Bruce.
Commissioners.
Yeah.
I'm Eddie Eastis, the Director of Parks and Recreation. Just to start this off, back in February 5th, Bruce McMillan's team was authorized to redesign the Douglas Recreation Center to re-engage the community, to assure that that redesign was meeting the needs of the community. Bruce has met, his team has met with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, has met with the Douglas Center Advisory Board on more than one occasion. City administration has also assisted collecting community input in regards to amenities that the community would like to see with that design. Excuse me. Deb Nuss, the chair of the Douglas Center Advisory Board, is here tonight and certainly can provide some comment or answer questions. Kevin Bryant with the Douglas Center Advisory Board also is here tonight, could provide some comments, answer questions. David Baker, several of you have met with him, can provide some comments and answer questions in regards to the facility. I'm also happy to see several community members here tonight that have been attending many of the public meetings. So I'm very pleased to see community members attending the meetings here. I'm sure that they would also be happy to provide some comments. Garrick Baker with the Bruce McMillan's team is going to walk you through the recommended design from the Douglas Center Advisory Board's recommendation. After that presentation, I'd like to entertain some discussion on what next steps might be. So with that, Bruce, Garrick, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. We have had the opportunity to review several options with the advisory board, and the information being brought to you this evening is a consensus that was recently received from the board, and I'd like to ask Garrick to walk you through the design at this point, and then entertain any questions, allow those in the audience to make comments. We do have other members of our design team with us this evening, engineers, interior designers, etc., that could also answer questions as you might have at this point. Thank you.
We're going to skip through a few slides here that you do have within your packet. It just briefly goes over the timeline that has brought us to this point today, starting way back in May 2017 and progressing to February 2019 and today. Regarding the recommended design, we have discussed with the advisory board, and we will be proposing this option here today. The building is situated in the southwest corner of the site, with the lobby opening up more towards the park versus street sides or towards the highway. But it would open up and serve the park much better. Just to clarify, the basketball courts to the north will remain. We are not touching those. The parking lot will not receive any upgrades, as has been shown in some of the previous iterations. This design here, and I will zoom in so we can actually see this. You would be entering in from a vestibule and a covered entryway on the northeast corner and moving into a lobby. The office space here would have a view of the entire lobby, so that way you can see who is coming in, and also easily check out sports equipment, along with an office back here for private meetings and some storage adjacent to that as well. We do have an elevator figured into this configuration, along with a small counter with a small sink over there if somebody wanted to bring in some type of concession during the day. We also have the stairway included in there, and you'll really be able to see it in the rendering towards the end. We do have a restroom accessed from the exterior with all tamper-proof fixtures, and that was one of the recommendations from the community survey, is that they really wanted to have that restroom accessed from the actual park itself without having to go into the building. We also have a family restroom located down here, along with our drinking fountains, restrooms, and changing rooms in here as well. All of these will meet ADA. I'll zoom back out here. Moving into the court space, it appears to be a wood floor, but it will actually be a synthetic material. We can also get it to look or resemble wood. The courts in here, the red will actually meet the High School Association regulation at an 84-foot length and 50-foot width. The blue lines, you can see the lighter lines on the exterior would be the cross courts for basketball, but the blue lines would be for college level volleyball, and we have 2 courts there. The pickleball would also be situated within those. Just for clarity, we do not show those. We do have storage around the exterior of the court space, along with some spectator seating. We do have a community room alternate shown, which I will get into here shortly. But we also do have an elevated track, which can also be accessed from the stairwell in the southwest corner. And please, at any time, stop me if you have any questions or need anything clarified. So the base building would be 20,062 square feet approximately. And the estimates that we have shown here are very preliminary. This has not been put out to bid or anything of that nature. But we would be looking at roughly $3.4 million for this base building. It seems we've missed our second floor. Oh, there it is. Okay. But on that first floor, as I called out earlier, we do have that community room, which would be adding 880 square feet to the building. I'll zoom in on that one as well. We do have some mechanical space allocated so we can actually serve that, and some restrooms. So if somebody had a birthday party or an evening class or something, this could actually be accessed without having to go through the complete recreation center, and this can be partitioned off or locked off, but also serve as an exit as well.
Let me ask you a quick question while you're on that. So if you didn't build that space of Alt 1, what would the building shape look like? Would it have a notch in it?
Yes.
So that, on the face of it, that doesn't make any sense, does it? I mean, it costs you money to make those other 2 sides rather than a rectangular building, right?
There would be some associated costs with going ahead and adding the building envelope to that side. But with adding in the additional square footage of the concrete,
right,
and then adding just that much more would be adding a little bit to that overall cost.
Thanks.
And then you would also have the mechanical systems and the electrical that would be serving that as well. So more additional associated costs with that. Any other questions? Moving on to the second floor, we do have room for a 2 or 3 lane track going around the perimeter that would be open to the courts below. They would be accessed through the elevator at the north end, and you would be able to view the lobby below and the stairwell there as well. We do have either possibly storage or a restroom configuration here as well. The fitness room alternate would be identical in footprint to that alternate 1. So once we accepted alternate 1, we could stack on top of that and increase the building space. So this fitness area could be enclosed or it could be left open. It really would just come down to what the commission would like to do there. And we do have our second exit there. We do have mechanical areas within the first floor. between our building and then the breadbasket over here as well. With the base bid and then the alternate, or base estimate, and alternates 1 and 2, it brings the project slightly over $4 million. Are there any questions regarding that?
What's the difference in the price between the 2-lane track and the 3-lane? I know it seems to me that the 3-lane track is the more desirable and has been the recommendation. So what's the cost difference?
There would be some costs associated with it. We do not have it plugged into this number here, but the building would grow in size, probably about 6 foot in width and then another 3 feet to the south as well. So there would be some associated costs with that, which are not calculated into that.
So it'd be plus
$4
whatever this
million
extra
plus,
6
yes.
feet is. Or, But that track that you have show there in red is really a 2-lane track.
And the 3rd lane would be added to the perimeter of that so that we could keep all of the open space for the courts below. Right now we do.
It would not mean moving the walls out. It would mean moving the track in.
We would be moving the walls out. The building would have to grow because we could not add to the interior portion of this. Because at that point, we would start encroaching on that court, and building would be the airspace above it. And we do have swing away equipment for all of your goals and the volleyball nets and everything. So we have to really preserve that open space there to make those useful.
Thank you.
That's you just mentioned that $4 million. Does that include all of the equipment associated with it as well? So
Yes.
like, okay.
And moving on to the exterior, this would be as you would be entering from the northeast corner. We do have a small vestibule shown there, but then we would have a covered entry as well, which will be further defined if the city commission approves. We do have that entryway there going into the community room if that alternate is accepted, and then the alternate for the fitness room is shown as well. We do have mechanical courtyards, and we're have an envelope of using some of the stone to get it to fit into the community a little bit better there. So in summation, we do have an 84-foot court and then 2 collegiate-sized volleyball courts, 2 pickleball courts, an elevated track, and then the alternates for the community room, fitness room, and that would bring the building all the way up to 21,830 square feet and a price tag of just over $4 million.
You mentioned in the beginning about the parking lot. I remember maybe I walked over there with you, Eddie, and there's a power pole in there that's right next to the freezer. And my assumption had been that we were going to do some parking lot. And when we say we're not going to do parking lot, is that just under this amount of money? Because we've got some site work that can be covered under the CDBG, right?
Correct. And we do anticipate relocating those utilities underground. That would be outside of this project. And yes, we would intend to use all community development block grant fund that would be available for those improvements. What we backed out of the project is the freezer, relocation of the freezer at the breadbasket. And I've interacted with Mary Beth, and she's okay with it staying where it's at. That doesn't help the parking lot out a lot, but it does help the budget out. Potentially in some future project with community development block grant funds, maybe that freezer could be moved. We've ran into issues with trying to relocate it on the east side of the breadbasket building because of Westar relocation of their utilities. We also looked at relocating to the south side of the building. Bruce had even looked at that and the construction aspect of what required for that freezer. That's a difficult move.
Yeah.
It is. The best answer at this point is to leave it where it's at. We would improve that parking lot by relocating those utilities. And yes, we would look to continue to make exterior lighting improvements, parking lot improvements, and some site work, and try to utilize community development block grant funds for those aspects. We simply can't use that funding source for the facility. We can use it for design. We can use it for those other improvements associated with the project.
You've got a small Parks and Rec storage and I think maintenance building there. Does that stay?
We do not envision that staying. It is not within the construction zone necessarily, but it's not the most inviting facility to associate with such a nice new facility. We'll have some of that discussion next week also with the joint maintenance facility, and that's another discussion, but we lose that facility at the Douglas, we would lose the El Paso Lane, that would hamper us. So that'll be next week's discussion. We do anticipate this one going away.
When you describe the basketball courts, the lateral, now the volleyball courts, those don't have drop-down basket hoops?
Each one will have, and we've got it to where, if I can move up here, each one of the courts will be configured and it will be set up on a tablet, so even your staff could go in there and press a button and then set it up for a volleyball on court 1 and basketball on court 2.
Okay, good.
So there's a lot of flexibility within the actual use within the space.
And the, I guess when we had the last meeting, I got a lot of, and it was on the other 2 rec centers, but got a lot of questions about the flooring material. There's kind of 2 camps. One is the durability and maintenance cost camp, and the other one is the coaches camp, which says we want to play on regular wood floors because it ball bounces different or it sounds different. I don't know well, I know the difference. I just haven't played on the artificial, so I'm unaware of the differences. So what's the thinking on this?
I'll give you my opinion, because that's what you'll get from everybody when you talk about flooring. We get a lot of different opinions from the different salesmen that come through as well. A lot of the facilities that we've reviewed, Kansas City, different areas, recommend the synthetic floor simply because of the ease of maintenance. We also go to a lot of facilities in Kansas City that have wood floors, and they tout those very highly as well. We know that they cost more to maintain. David has a wood floor now in the Douglas Center Annex, or at the Douglas Center. We're very proud of that wood floor, and we've talked about it an awful lot. The requirement for people to have to bring an extra pair of shoes in order to use that facility. That's a challenge in public facilities. It requires that additional supervision and management just to ensure that. We've received an awful lot of recommendations for the synthetic flooring. The cushion factor is equal or better than a wood floor. You're always going to get an opinion from people on wood floors. There's a lot of old school perspective. I know that Rock Chalk in Lawrence touts their wood floor and their ability to bring in high-level tournaments. That doesn't mean that brings in the majority of tournaments. That just simply means one style of tournament. I think we're after a majority of tournament more so than we are at a certain level of tournament, if we want to go down that road in regards to wood floor versus synthetic floor. I do know, in talking with facilities, the ease of maintenance and replacement is with the synthetic floor. That's why we've really targeted that floor with the other facilities.
Good. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the balance is, do we think we need to have pure wood floor to attract tournaments and so on? And so I'm glad you explained that. The other thing I wanted to ask about is built-in security, perhaps. You mentioned a few things about coming from the outside into the building, and are we going to incorporate cameras or anything like that to take care of exterior security? Or
David could certainly speak of that. He has a camera system in his facility now and allows him to have a minimal supervision, so he can see all that facility as well as the parking lot. from the one location. Very important.
Good.
Very important that we incorporate that in. The aspect of the outside restroom to be able to support the park, I'm very supportive of. There was a lot of discussion of that with the advisory board. One perspective of that, we added an outside restroom to the Northview pump house, Northview pool, to support that playground. Before, we did not have any restroom at all. I remember Wyatt Thompson that you can speak of. Young moms and kids, as they attend those playgrounds, they would stay away from them because they didn't have a restroom. We added a porta potty, that helped a little bit. Now that we have a regular restroom, it's a much more popular playground. We're approaching this outside restroom in that park, in that playground area, in that basketball court the same. There's a benefit to that park and those users to have that restroom there.
Yeah, good. Thanks a lot.
I'll comment, if I might, on the walking track. The preference certainly is more than 2-lane. Park and Rec Advisory Board made the same comment. We would like to be able to work towards 3. We've talked with that a little bit. We need to get further along to be able to feel comfortable, if I'm accurate, Bruce, in regards to 3 versus 2.
We've spoken, as Garrick mentioned, we've spoken with our consultant in Wichita, Schaefer Johnson Cox Fry, and the 3rd lane would expand the building out as was requested when we talked about this a few moments ago. The footprint as it stands now at the 20,000 square feet, that includes the elevated track as well. One thing I want to bring back into the discussion briefly here is that there are site drainage issues on this site that we've discussed in the previous iterations. The site drainage is incorporated into the cost estimates that we have now. Judd Gladden with Schwab Eaton is here if you have any further questions regarding site drainage and the impact that we need to take care of within this project, even though it doesn't include the breadbasket freezer, it doesn't include the parking because of the alternate funding. The site drainage portion has remained with us in what you're being presented to this evening.
So the CDBG will not pick up this part of the site preparation, which is the drainage prep.
That's our understanding from, Eric may want to address that.
The problem with using CDBG beyond design is it will kick in Davis-Bacon for the entire project, even for non-federal dollars that go into the project. So we're using CDBG from the 2017 and the 2018 annual years for design work. And as Eddie said, in future years, we could use CDBG for some of that future site work. We can't do that site work now and then pay for it with later dollars. It actually has to be a separate project.
Good, thank you.
Part of the ability to bring this project into a fairly reasonable budget has been to reduce the footprint size of the building, and in so doing, we bring it back down to just the 2-lane track as it stands right now.
When you go, for example, when we go for bid, is it your intent, I know you've got a base bid plus 2 alts, but is your intent to find out what a 3rd lane would cost, or is that not?
That is not in the program at the moment, Commissioner.
Good, yeah.
I would like some kind of an estimate. We are, our first effort with regard to community development block grant for this project resulted in us having to completely regroup, and I'm interested in knowing what the amount that we would be applying for, exactly what it covered and how much we would be seeking, because if that fails, then we'll be adding that cost to this cost, and I'm just interested in making sure that we know exactly what is going to happen. And I don't have to know it tonight. I just I want us to be, I don't want to have to turn around and cover the total cost.
You're requesting, what would the additional cost be to get us to a 3-lane elevated track? Is that the question, Commissioner?
Well, that was one question earlier. My question is, how much are we expecting Community Development Block Grant to cover?
For this project?
For any of it, the design or the parking lot or whatever. We don't even know really, since we're redesigning, the extent of the parking and what that looks like, so.
The numbers that you're looking at here on these estimates of this project do not include any community development block grant funds at all.
I know, and I want to know that.
And there will not be any community development block grant funds used for any construction aspect of the project.
Right.
We can use what we have remaining for
site
design
work,
and
parking, and.
future site work, not the existing site work that is critical for the construction of the building.
Okay.
When we talk about future site work, what we mean is parking lot improvement we call it at the breadbasket parking lot. We also can use it for any other exterior parking that would occur, and we could use it, I believe, for some parking, what we'd identified previously as some parking lot lighting.
Or, yeah, and parking, if we were to add parking in the future along Yuma and 10th Street, some of that angled parking, and it's just that if you link that construction with the building, Davis-Bacon applies to everything, and that is going to raise the cost, so.
So when would we be applying for the Community Development Block Grant?
Well,
after this?
That's part of our annual allocation that we get every year.
You'd be using our allocation.
I might just point out also the intent of what you're seeing here, budgeted amount. This building would be able to be opened and operational completely without those other future site work items. It's very critical that the building is going to be able to be opened and operational, people will be able to use. Those would just be future improvements that we originally had identified as part of the project. We've pulled out to try to reduce. The parking lot obviously is usable today. It'll continue to be so, and we will improve it by relocating those utilities, those light poles that are there that cause such an issue. But we are simply not moving the freezer, which opens up the parking lot a little bit more.
Well, the parking lot is inadequate. I mean, so we're going to have to solve the parking, but I understand that.
Yes, so that's something we'll be targeting with those future funds.
Have you considered any use of 9th Street at the south end there, where the, right beside the breadbasket?
We've looked at the potential for
Closing
on-street
some of
parking,
that?
both all around the block, actually.
everything?
To try to increase all that we can.
Okay.
And we've looked at potentially being able to do that with city staff at some time, and again, targeting funding sources that could provide those materials. So.
Because it's just a stub or a dead-end street, and I just wondered about utilizing some footage there.
Sure.
Okay.
I do have a question about the third track. I guess it kind of seems like from the discussion right there that the third lane in the track hasn't been ruled out. So I'm a little bit confused on what I'm voting on tonight, because if we approve the base building concept, that's what you just presented as a 2-lane, and alternative 1 and 2 is what we're presenting up there. Like, how do we go back and add a third track later after we just passed that?
Well, we're at a percentage design at this point. Bruce is gonna have to help with that, how we would progress to some other type of design consideration.
In order to incorporate that 3rd lane on that elevated track, you would have to authorize us to expand the size of the building and determine what the footprint size is. As Garrick has explained, that's going to add another 6 to 8 feet each direction, something like that. And
which I understand that. So maybe this is less of an architecture question and more of a city process question. Why didn't we have that? If we knew we were going to discuss the 3rd lane, why didn't we have that mapped out on what a third lane would look like before this came before us?
Well, we've talked about a third lane with all the advisory boards. We have. We've been trying to work this footprint into a smaller footprint. We were trying to get this budget at all possible as skinny as we could. I do want to continue to talk with Bruce, if we can, of what it does take to get that third lane. We do hear that. Tonight, we just couldn't come in with confidence and say a third lane is going to fit in this base project.
From what our consultants are telling us, that this is basically a walking track. It is not a jogging or a running track. 2-lane is adequate from what our resources are telling us for a walking track. Now, there may be comments made this evening that contradict that statement. But from what our resources are telling us, a 2-lane track is very adequate for a walking track, which is what the intent is here.
So if we, per se, the commission passes this tonight as recommended, what would the process look like moving forward in discussing that third lane?
That would be a expansion of the overall dimensions, width and length of the overall footprint of the entire building, and that would increase that. Right now we're budgeting with the alternates, we're budgeting right now roughly $185 to $190 a square foot. So if you're expanding the footprint on that, I'm not going to calculate that in my head right now, but generally you're adding heating and air conditioning because of the increased volume that you're dealing with for the size of the building, as well as additional surface materials, lighting, et cetera, et cetera. So it is not just adding a third lane. There's other costs involved.
Again, I guess it's less of an architecture question and more of like a city mechanism and process question. I want to understand what I'm voting on tonight, and if we add a third lane, what's the next process? And it seems like there's discussion that has to happen, so.
Bruce,
Well,
how,
the recommendation that has come to us is a 2-lane walking track.
But if we're going to talk about
if you
a third
don't-
lane, what's the point of us voting on this right
Well,
now?
that's the point. If you don't want it, then say so.
I don't know if I don't want it because I don't have any of the additional information about the third lane.
Well, we went through this process once with CDVG, right? We costed it $3.3 million. It was all coming out of them, but then we ran into the Kansas cash law. So we couldn't use that mechanism to build it. So then the committee came back to us and they said, now that we have this opportunity, which is to use other funding mechanisms, we want to come back with another design. This is the design they came back with.
But that's not what, no, it's not, because the Parks and Rec and the Douglas Board both suggested 3 lanes. And so if we're going to continue to have a conversation about a third lane, I understand how we got here. I was on the commission too. I'm wondering while we're voting it in this way, if we're going to keep exploring the square footage of the building and adding another lane and changing the price, like what's the point of us voting in this now if this isn't the final iteration?
Our discussion ultimately is cost. There's a preference for 3-lane. There's no doubt about it. We're trying to pull the cost of the building down. If the desire is the third lane, it certainly can be built in. It's just the cost associated with it. That's the whole discussion.
And that's fine. And I want to have that discussion. I'm just saying.
Sure.
It seems odd how we split that out in that regard. I would have rather just, like, we're talking about alternative 1 and alternative 2 right now. We could have done the same exact thing with the third lane and voted on a building tonight and passed it and got this moving forward. But instead, we're going to pass a building, and then we're going to have further discussions about further adaptions of that building possibly. And it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why we follow that process.
I mean, we're going to need to discuss with Bruce a scope and fee for final design. If we want to include in there their exploration of what it would take to do that third lane, so we understand that more, we could include that.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd like to know how wide the 2-lane track is and how wide the 3-lane track is.
6 feet and 9 feet.
6 and 9, so 3 foot per lane. Okay, thanks.
This is the original building. This is with the elevated 3-lane track. And this is where this is the original building. This is no community.
Right, it's large. Some of what Bruce and I are looking at, some of the original design that you had seen previously that had the at-grade track. It was a larger auditorium space, and it was in the neighborhood of $4.5 million. So expanding that building out, I'm not saying it's $500,000 to expand that building out, but it obviously is going to cost that 180 to 200 plus per square foot to take that building out. So rough numbers, but
There was an alternate that we figured early on in this redesign process that included raising that 3-lane track in the original design that we had and bringing that up without the community room. That took us to over 23,000 square feet in that iteration. We're at 21, just short of 22 now. And that was going to be in excess of $4.5 million with the 3-lane elevated track as a comparison.
How many square feet is the
Escape
foyer that's pictured on here? How many square feet is it?
That total, Commissioner, is your 21,830.
Just the foyer? How
Oh,
big
for the
is that?
foyer, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Let's get back to that. If I can just find the drawing. There we go. Okay, do you have it? I don't think so.
The space itself is about 16 feet by 20.
16 by 20?
That overall space, because we're roughly, it's gonna be longer than that. You're saying, the foyer or the lobby?
I don't know. Are they the same? Are they connected? Are they in this open space?
are you meaning on the computer this space here?
I just was looking at that picture with this see-through
The glass that
Right.
is shown on that front elevation encompasses everything from the building corner to approximately where the elevator is shown there.
16 by 20?
No, it's going to be, I think it might be a little longer than that, actually. We can give you an exact
I don't know.
dimension.
I don't expect instant necessarily, just that I'm curious that we have this basic open space, but yet we're talking about expanding the building because we don't have enough room, and can we,
It's been described to
better-
us, yeah, I'm sorry.
make better use of this open space?
It's been described to us even during the original design process that there is the potential for transitioning from one group utilizing the building or part of it to another group, and that the lobby area serves as that waiting area, transitioning area, as far as that's concerned. So the lobby space actually is a very utilized part of the building.
Commonly with our recreational programs and activities, you can imagine if we're using the 2 cross courts, whether they're basketball or volleyball, there's 4 teams out there playing. That also means there's 4 teams in waiting to come to the next game. You just certainly don't want them out in that court space necessarily. Spectator space will occupy, that additional auditorium space. So lobbies commonly, and we're building that in with the other facilities as well, that there is that staging space, that staging area for next teams, the next group, the next user, the next participant. So it's important space. Other questions on the design aspect?
Just what is the expected time delay that if we decided to come back and look at a third lane and what all that meant?
Well, we would need to work with Bruce on a scope, and we would need to come back to the commission with a contract amendment for final design. And the timeframe for us to discuss that is...
In the reading material, we had a timeline that we'd kind of laid out. I didn't see it in here, but you know, how long it'd take us to get this facility open.
If we progress today with final design, we've talked 60 to 90 today
Yes.
to complete final design. Then you're looking at 45 to 60 days for bid opportunities for bidding, the bid process. So you'd be looking at, 6 months before you would probably be securing a contract.
So we talked about bringing a contract back for this commission to go to final design. Can at that time, we have an estimate for what it would take to go to the third track, and then we could either proceed to final design, contract option A with the 2, contract option B with the 3. Can we do that?
Correct.
Okay.
That's the thought process, and that's with those alternates. If we would progress to final design and bidding, again, the recommendation is to bid this out with that base design and the 2 alternates, to fully final design that entire building with those 2 alternates, bid the project with those 2 alternates. The commission would have an opportunity to be able to review those bids and make a determination if you would want to proceed to construction with just the base building, with alternate number 1, just the base building, alternate 1 and number 2. You'd have that opportunity to do that. I really think that we need to be able to get a base building that is either acceptable with the 2-lane or the 3-lane. I think that would be a very challenge to have a 2-lane or a 3rd-lane alternate. You're talking about almost two complete different building designs.
That is not an entirely different, but a somewhat different structural situation where I'm actually engaging our structural engineer for 2 projects, essentially, along with the other engineers to handle all the heating and air conditioning and so forth that go along with that, even though it doesn't seem on the surface as being a very major difference, it does add up to a lot of additional ramifications.
And how are we handling the design costs?
There's still, and Eric will have to help me with this a little bit, there still is some community development block grant funds that are available for design. I don't think that there's adequate funds to complete all of the design. Overrun of community development block grant funds for design costs could just be wrapped into the project budget.
So this just adds to that, right? I mean, can't have him doing it for free. He takes more design.
We have a lot of discussion to occur.
Yeah.
Didn't want to bring this up, but
I don't think we have to have complete final design for the 3-track part to get an estimate on how much it's going to cost extra. I don't think we have to have a final plan for the 2-track for the whole building, a final plan for the 3-track for a whole building.
We don't want to go that route.
If you want to get to the point that Ron just described, that's what's required.
Yeah, that's why I almost feel like you 2 are both proposing different routes, and that's why I asked this a question initially, but at the same time, we were able to come up with at least basic numbers and basic ideas of what it would cost to build the building in the first place in 2 additional rooms. So I feel like Commissioner Morris isn't completely wrong in the fact that we should be able to at least somewhat estimate what a 3rd track would cost.
We can get there, yes.
Without going to the final.
Without actually going
Engaging
into
the structural engineers.
Yeah, no.
To a full design.
No, we would not be into a final design.
If we choose the 3-lane track then we would for sure be committing to going to a final design. But we're just trying to pick what size track we want. And that's dictating the whole building.
I think we need to get an idea of what that is.
I think I know.
We need to have that discussion, but we think that we can get those numbers and we can get that back to you. That shouldn't be a problem. We obviously need to come back to you with some final design authorization. So, is that?
So, maybe just one more thing here, then Ron jump in. So, how did we get from the recommendation from the board to what was just presented? I mean, you mentioned we were price conscious.
We were trying to stay, if we could, in a $3.5 million range for a project. We weren't trying to price out a 3-lane track. That has always been a preference, and we haven't got to, a level of comfort with where we were at in the process to stand up here and say that we could do this 3-lane track for that amount. We've tried to make sure that the design and the meetings with the advisory boards was at least aware of a $3.5–4 million range. And we were trying to hold that so that we didn't bring back to you a $5 million project. So every project has to have an awareness and some price consciousness. It's what we've tried to do, but also respect what the community would like to see. That's why we've approached it also with alternates. And if bids come back, can we accomplish whatever thing the community would like to see? I think that's a responsible way to approach that. We didn't prioritize spaces or track or any of those sort of things. I think, and the advisory board can certainly speak to this, I think they've always felt the above grade, the elevated walking track should be included in any base building. They never had been in favor of a at-grade walking track. Their preference is 3-lane. We're trying to get all that accomplished within a reasonable amount of money.
It sounds like we're arguing for tabling this item, but Ron, you had some comments.
Yeah, I think, and I think I heard them say they could do this, it would be that the plan all along, if you gave approval tonight to move forward, was to bring back a contract amendment for finishing the design on what was proposed. What I think they can do is bring back two versions of that. One that would be for what you've seen tonight. One would be for something that would incorporate a third track, and then they would also have an estimate for what the impact of that third track would be. So you could decide that night which contract amendment you wanted to move forward with.
So, I think one of the problems I've been having with this conversation is most of the projects we have in front of us these days are in the millions. If you look at the North Campus corridor, for example, I think we started off with something like, I don't know, 20 million or something, then it went to 40 million, now we're almost up to 50 million something. And we just moved along patiently with that because K-State, that's what they were giving us, and that's what we were hearing from everybody. The parking lot at airport, we wanted something, but there was such force to move it to this millions of dollars, $4 or $5 million project over there, Aggieville. The garage is $11 million just for a garage from the TIF district, and another 20 to 13 million for infrastructure and everything else. But when it comes to the Douglas Center, we seem to be extremely picky about that financing source. $3 million is a lot of money. I agree with that. But at the same time, this is the same area or neighborhood that has equity issues. And if we're going to be that open to other people's ideas about the needs in the community as far as those three that I just mentioned, we should give the same opportunity to the Douglas Advisory Board as well as the Douglas Center neighborhood area. Most of this, although there's parking issues here and there, most of them are in walking distance, and that's what we want for this neighborhood gym. I don't mind if the price is a little bit, I mean, I'm thinking maybe $1 million or something. That seems like a lot, but when I look at all of these other double-digit figures we have for everything else, it seems as though this is the one we decide to focus on to be financially, fiscally responsible all of a sudden. You know, we're trying to be as responsible with our money in every area possible, with sales tax, CIDs, TDDs, you name it, we're trying to put it in there. And I think this is one of those things that requires the same type of attention for the children and families that live in that neighborhood. So I would like to see the design that the advisory board also would like to see in their neighborhood, and see what that means so that we have all of the information in front of us. I think originally we were okay with the 3.5 million because we thought that's what CDBG funds, we were going to get that money and we were going to be happy with it. Nobody has to pay anything extra. But since that didn't happen, I thought that opened the door a little bit more to give the advisory board and the neighborhood what they actually want because of the other two rec centers at the middle school and at the two middle schools. So I just want to think a little bit bigger and make it possible for those residents that are living there to keep wanting to live there. Make that value, make the properties there a little bit more valuable so people do want to live in that neighborhood. So I just want to make sure we're focused on the reason for doing this, not because it has to stay in this fine. We tried to fight that with the airport and with the garage and with everything else. There was such pushback. And I want us to be a little bit attentive to this neighborhood one.
When I looked at this motion, I can't come up with a way to amend it appropriately in this setting. So my recommendation is that we table this and ask the staff to come back with the recommendations that we've made, and that is to have a comparative cost for a 3-track building, a 3 elevated track building, so we can do the comparison between the 2 base costs. That's acceptable.
Yes, I don't have a problem with that. My thought on the whole thing is I've been frustrated about funding. You know, Commissioner Reddy talked about funding sources. Well, the airport, we got funding sources, parking fees. You know, we got TIF districts or different things, but this is going to boil down to a property tax increase. That's what it's going to boil down to, because that's the only way it's going to be funded. I don't particularly care for that at all. And I also see this as a huge case of mission creep. Drives me crazy. We do that a lot on projects here. We started off saying we wanted a basketball court, and it was going to cost around $3 million. And now we've got a weight room and a community room, and the track is driving the whole train. And it's the classic case of mission creep. We can't stay focused on what the priority was. And that drives me nuts. But I agree that, you know, maybe we should table this thing, but I'm interested in the final funding. And, you know, does this mean that we start the budget discussion, you know, in the next month by going right in saying, well, 0.5 for the Douglas Center increase? That's the starting point for the budget discussion, is a minimum of a 0.5 mil increase. If that's what we want, fine, but let's be honest about it. You know, the other rec centers, there's nothing there. The other two we keep referring to at the middle schools, there's 0 there right now. The Douglas Center has something. When those things are done over there at the 2 middle schools, there is a sales tax funding source that was approved. It's not property tax. It probably would have been nice if we'd have put the Douglas Center into that mix too, but we had high hopes for this block grant thing, and we got messed up. So I would like to see the funding on there, but I'm with you on, let's just table this, nail this mission creep thing down so that, you know, we have a project we can vote on and say that's it. Because last time I voted on this, I thought it was done. We had a $3.3 million project. My assumption was the funding fell through, we'd continue with that project and just find some funding. And that is not what happened. And that's where my frustration is.
I'd like to, you had earlier indicated that there's a drainage additional charge that we should expect and that we could hear from the consultants tonight. Could we hear that report? You said there's some significant drainage costs.
Hi there, I'm Judd Gladden with Schwab Eaton. It's not an additional cost. Part of the building cost is to handle the stormwater drainage.
Yeah.
So we're adding this impervious surface, so we need to handle that increase. So with that budgeted money there, includes a small stormwater management facility, a pond, right next door. So roof drainage, the associated site drainage right next to it will flow into there and flow out of there, connecting to the existing storm sewer, so that the
Where will the detention pond be?
It's gonna be right on the east side of the building, between the building and
the breadbasket. Okay. So what is the estimate for that? And that is not included in this cost we're considering tonight?
That is included.
It is included?
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
how much of the cost is that?
I don't have that figure on top of my head.
Okay.
It's a small facility, so
Okay.
the impact is minimal, compared to the square footage of the building costs. Now, the significant site costs happen with the site or the utility relocations, the parking lot improvements, and that is intended to be use the CDBG funding for that.
And that's my question that they're going to talk about also eventually, is how much of the CDBG funds we're talking about, total.
Asking about when Eric talked about this, we're talking about the future CDBG funds that we might use for that purpose.
For the site design, or site preparation, whatever it is.
I think that we had estimated that there'd be a reduction in the project by not using community development block grant funds and reducing Davis-Bacon wages, taking some of that site work out, that it was in a range of $750,000 that we were going to be able to reduce that project amount from. But I think we're confusing future site work and existing site work. Future site work is the breadbasket parking lot improvement, and that could be covered with community development block grant funds at some time in the future. The site work that he's referring to is critical site work that has to happen with the facility, and we are not going to use community development block grant funds with that, because that would kick in Davis-Bacon wages into the facility, and we do not want that to happen. So there are two different styles of site work that are associated with the building. I don't know if that's answering or not.
But this material says that CDBG funds could be used for a portion of Macmillan's design, or design fees could be incorporated into a bond project. The CDBG funds may also be used for site work, parking, and exterior lighting in support of the project. I'm
Correct.
just trying to figure out how much you're going to depend on the CDBG funds for.
We've been using, and Eric, I don't know if we have an accurate breakdown of what we have still available in community development block grant funds, but they've been funding all the design, and we are going to continue to use those. And I believe there was, I don't know, $20,000 to $40,000 in that range of available community development block grant funds to still apply to design. Bruce has a contract right now for final design, and he completed a lot of that final design on that original project. So he's used some of that final design contract amount. That's what some of our discussion with him has to be, so that we get an accounting of where he's at in that final design contract that he previously had, and any future final design that we're going to do, and what that cost is going to be.
Okay.
And we'll
So Mike's idea is if we table it and you bring it back, then we find out some of this.
When you come back, what she is asking for is the future CDBG applicability. In other words, parking lot and those things that you cited, how much does that cost? And we presume that will all be covered by CDBG. But it's not part of this cost.
Yeah, just recognize that currently Trump's budget has $0 in CDBG, and Congress hasn't done anything, so we haven't gotten our 2019 allocation announcement yet.
So what I'd like to do at this point is entertain public comment, and then we'll come back with a hopefully a motion to table. So any public comment at this time on this issue, please come forward and let us hear from you. And if you sign in, there's a sign-in sheet for you. You can do that after you talk if you want to.
Okay.
We have a 5-minute limit. I don't know if you're aware of that, but you're probably short, aren't you? You deliver this quickly?
Well, I was asking a question about what if we make, like, we expand the parking lot instead of moving the freezer from the breadbasket, like we expand the parking lot, or we add another parking lot to the Douglas Center.
Yeah, I think that's what we asked them to do. When they come back, we'll look at the parking lot, which is going to be in a future edition, because it's not covered under this base cost.
What I was also thinking before that is if we add a parking lot underneath the Douglas Center.
Oh, you mean a
underground one?
Yeah, well, I think, to be quite honest, that cost would be exorbitant.
Yeah, that's why I changed my question from it.
Okay. Anyone else, please? We can have you come forward while he's signing his name. And Dave, did you want to comment, or Deb?
I'd like to know what your name is, sir, young man.
Ben.
Ben? Thank you for coming up and
Absolutely.
asking your question. Yeah, and sitting here all night to do that.
Debbie Nuss, 2404 Sumac. I'm the current chair of the Douglas Center Advisory Board. In your packet, you had the draft of the minutes from our last meeting where we were presented with options and voted on the options that were presented to us. When we selected the option that we did so being sensitive to the fact that you would be concerned about budgetary issues. But admittedly, there was an option that was more expensive than the one that was presented to you tonight, that did have a larger footprint, did have a third lane on the track. Again, being sensitive to your concerns about budget, the board and the public that night selected the option that they did. I will tell you, though, there was support, though, for spending a little bit more money to maybe expand that footprint and get that third track. So personally, I can say I appreciate the fact that you are going to look at that going forward and that you weigh those issues, because I do think that whatever we get now is what we're going to get. And we won't add those rooms, we won't add those space. We'll always talk about doing it, but as we know, we don't. So the board, and I think the community, based on what I heard at those meetings, would like us to do as much as we can now if it's financially feasible. So thank you for your discussion and letting me say that.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else, please?
I'm going to bring back the discussion for a moment that Debbie has just described. We showed 3 different opportunities at the meeting that she's just mentioned. The first one was to take the original building, which was 17,561 square feet, and we budgeted that based upon retaining the 3-lane track on grade with the inflation factor of what we had budgeted last year, because we wouldn't be to bid until about the same time this year. That came in at $221 a square foot with a 10% contingency at $3.9 million. So the building we had last year is already increased. That's a 108-foot court, 2 cross courts, 2 volleyball courts, 4 pickleball courts, and that was a 3-lane on-grade track. We took the 3-lane track, elevated it, same footprint, same building. We brought the track up. That took us to 23,377 square feet. It brought it down to 193 a square foot, and that brought us in at 4,521,000 and change. With the community fitness room in the notch out, if you remember that plan, we call it the Dave Baker Room on the northwest corner. That added another 1,868 square feet, brought us to 25,245 square feet at $193 a square foot. So the base building, by adding the elevated track and the community/fitness room at 25,245 square feet, budgets $4,900,000, $5 million, which is right where Commissioner Reddy is talking right now. And that would be the full facility, elevated track, all the courts that we originally designed, and the community fitness room. And if that would be the Commission's preference, that would be a design that we would move forward with. But that's at the Commission's discretion, obviously. But that was the initial presentation that Debbie has just described, that the advisory board opted to not move forward with, and has brought this one back to you at this time, if that's of any further clarification.
Okay, good. Thanks, Bruce. Anyone else, please?
Dave Baker, Director, Douglas Center. I'd like to comment tonight, Commissioners, as a director, but also as a citizen. The Douglas Center is the only recreation center we have today that's opened every day and that serves this community. It has done a tremendous job in the last 10 years. It's doing things there now that's never been done there before. We do not have a facility that accommodates all things that go on in recreation. I was visiting with a friend the other day and we were talking about this. Ahern Fieldhouse was built in the late 40s. Allen Fieldhouse in Lawrence was built around the same time. Both of those buildings are huge. Douglas Center was built in 1941. I don't believe, looking at Douglas Center today, people were thinking about 2020. That building is very inadequate for today. I would hope, I know there's money involved, but this is a one-time thing. And I would hope that this community builds something that's going to be here for people 30, 40 years from now that's adequate. We do not play basketball in Ahern today, but that facility was big and it's still viable. It's used a lot for a lot of things. We know that Allen Fieldhouse, it holds 18, 20,000 people today. They've refurbished it, but it's still viable today. We can't do that with Douglas Center. I would hope that we would not build something today where we're looking at building a building that would be very similar to what we have at Douglas Center. Money is involved. Commissioner Urshi Reddy, she's been right on. Are we giving all parts of the community the same treatment? I think it's imperative that we give that some serious thought with this facility, because it's going to be important to this community years from now when we're all gone. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, David.
I'm Mary Ann Fleming, 215 South 8th. I have lived in the South Points area for quite a few years, and I have been very actively involved in affairs in that part of the town. I hadn't prepared anything, so I might as well just be blunt. Some years ago, there was a pool at Douglas Center. It was disintegrating, so it was taken out. There was the promise, of course, oh, well, we'll put something down there. Well, the something never happened. Then there was the business of the park. Yeah, we finally got Truth Park. But I think there were 3 or 4 locations that were proposed for a park, but then they were more valuable for other uses, like commercial. I guess I'm expressing frustration and a little bit of resentment. Let's treat this part of town decently for a change. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Anyone else, please? If not, we'll close public comment. And at this time, if there are any further comments, we can do that, but if not, let's
Yeah, I have a
entertain a
quick
motion.
comment. First, and I'll take as long as I want. First and foremost, I want to thank everybody in this room who's done work on this. This hasn't been an easy project from the start, right? Our funding source completely changed, and we had to go back to the drawing board. I just want to reiterate, when I asked the question, I didn't mean to set off an initial firestorm. What confused me is that I didn't understand what we were doing tonight. It almost had you come up here and said, we didn't propose the third track because of money, then I would have understood. But what I was hearing was, we're going to pass this and then we're going to have conversations about a third track. And that's what was confusing me, and that's what I didn't understand. I'm not sure we ever came to a conclusion about why we were doing it this way. So I just wanted to say that's what was confusing me. I understand cost is a consideration. It's a consideration for me as well, and I want to explore that, but that's not what I was hearing, and so I was confused about the process. And then last but not least, I'll just say I'm okay with mission creep on this project for exactly what some of the speakers said out there. We should have been having this conversation about places like the community center 20 years ago. We have one shot at this, and if we don't do it the right way, we're not going to go back and readdress those issues most likely, but we have to make investment into the Douglas Center. Otherwise, we'll be looking to sell it off as well, because we won't be able to pay to maintain it and fix it up in an appropriate manner to where it can be used. So investment has to happen. The other thing that I just want to point out is those neighborhoods just got established, many of them as opportunity zones, right? So we're encouraging private investment into these areas to raise property value and just kind of put some revitalization in those communities. So I think it's okay that we have a good long discussion about the investment that the city makes in those scenarios, right? That's our one community facility in that neighborhood. If we want to encourage private development, then us as a city should also chip in some money too, and do what we can. So I look forward to continuing to talk about this. Hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll actually have a building. There's been some bump in the roads, but I just appreciate everybody's work. And I think we're going to come out with a product that everybody's pleased with. It might take a little bit longer than we expected, and the building might be a little bit bigger or have an extra room that maybe we didn't originally plan. But I want to make sure that we pass something that the community, and particularly that neighborhood, wants and is going to utilize and love for years. So I feel positive about the direction that this is going.
I, from the beginning, have been supportive of the Douglas Center Douglas Activity Center. This commission, in my view, committed to this facility, and we're just struggling pulling the money together. And I just want to know how much it's going to cost totally, and not have us commit to building the building and then, you know, the CDBG, we're going to end up paying for that too, and these add-on kinds of costs. I just want us to go into this with our eyes open and knowing what the cost is going to be. So thanks. I'm encouraged to, I want to see it. I want equity, as you just said, for this part of town. I am an advocate for it, so just have to, it's a process and we just have to get there.
Just want to ask Ron and the staff, do you have enough information here for another session?
Yes, I think so, and so, you know, I'm thinking, maybe we need to give you 3 contract options to proceed with. So I'm trying to be efficient too, as we bring this item back, that you can vote on something to proceed with. So, sounds to me like we kind of need to present the same thing that was presented to the board, so that you can have that for your options, and if we proceed to final design on each one of those would have that pricing for proceeding to final design on whichever option you pick.
You know, my main concern is just how we're gonna fund it, and I'd like to see some options on that. I see on there where we're talking about a possible sales tax. You know, I think Bernie mentioned, you know, trying to raise sales tax for operations, but now you're gonna shave off some of that for the Douglas Center. So I wanna see how that fits in the big picture, because I like the building designs, you know, all of them, from the first one to the 5 million. But it all boils down to me to, you know, what is the exact funding source and what's the impact on the bond and interest fund, because we're gonna pay interest on this building if we bond it, and the other 2 we're not, because it's pay as you go. And so those are the numbers I'm interested in. But I do wanna see the building get built, you know, I agree with that, but I wanna see the details of the cash flow.
Do we have a motion to table? Please.
Let me make a comment, then I'll table it, okay? Just a quick remarks. You know, I think from the previous commissioners and this one as well, we took our time with the roundabouts. That roundabout at Scenic and Anderson took years and years and years. We went from lights to this, and it was more expensive, but it was the safest thing to do. We did the same thing with the Peace Memorial Auditorium. A group of citizens came and said, hey, we don't want you to build offices there, think of something different. And Bruce, how many iterations did you come up with? I mean, we worked and worked and worked on that till we got it right. And this is one of those projects, we want to get it right. So, and that's going to take time, that's going to take a little bit more money. And if we stayed on for decades, I think we would get a return on our investment. We're not going to see it right away, but I'm pretty sure we will. That's what happened with the other 2 things that I remember that took us a while to get there, and that were a little bit more costly than what we anticipated. And with that, I move that we table Item B, the Douglas Recreation Center.
I'll second.
Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner McKee.
Yes.
Commissioner Morse.
Yes.
Mayor Dodson.
Yes.
Commissioner Reddy.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Now we have item H, and Commissioner Morris asked that we
Night's not over.
we bring item H, which is the North Manhattan Avenue Phase 3A street improvements, back as the final item.
And
I see Rob Ott.
Right, oh, good. Are we going through the whole presentation?
It's whatever you want to do, Commissioner.
I want to talk about economic development funds.
Okay.
That's my issue, I guess. So I don't know if Rob wants to talk about that, but
We're to
There's
the
the
end of the presentation,
there's the
so there we go.
breakdown. Okay.
I think, I'm sorry, Commissioner, this is what was in the commission memo in terms of splits. And I think you want to debate the 23%, which was proposed to come out of the Eco Devo Fund.
Right, for almost $500,000.
Correct.
And I know that the North Campus, this is just one piece, $2 million piece of the North Campus corridor plan. And I did not envision using the rest of the economic development money that we have on streets, or I envisioned having economic development money so that we could use it for more traditional, attracting businesses, making a contribution to setting up some labs that we need here in this community, that kind of thing, rather than piecemealing it out for pavement and all the sewer pipes and all that. So that's what I wanted to bring up this evening and ask the commission to discuss.
Good.
Yeah, see, my point on that is we got 7 million in an economic development fund. Voters passed it, said we could use it on streets. I'd probably use it all on streets, because otherwise you're gonna have another mill levy. You know, if you take that off of there, add another mill to the beginning of the budget discussion. Half for the Douglas Center, 1 mill for this, another mill for the police department, and we start the discussion, +3. We have to use this for that. And then this was planned anyway. We still got 7 million for the traditional things. And I think we told the chamber we'd like to keep about 4 for that. So in my mind, we got 3 million more we can throw into this project.
Wasn't it 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 for debt, 1/3 for infrastructure, 1/3 for eco-devo? So wouldn't this fall under infrastructure or?
So it was 1/3 for debt, 2/3 for jobs and infrastructure together.
Jobs and infrastructure.
We've just, from a budgetary standpoint, we've categorized it by thirds.
So we've spent 13 million on infrastructure. At that.
We could spend it all on
That
infrastructure
ratio.
legally.
I know, I understand what you said.
Rob, maybe if, I don't know if you have these figures, but as we look through the, kind of the North Campus corridor total, what's the intent there for participation by EcoDevo? Got any?
I might call him the lefty.
You know, we've seen, I mean, one of the problems here is we've seen the kind of struggle to put all these piece parts together. And so to both Commissioner Butler and Commissioner Morse's point, if we kind of have some idea of what the total intent is, we'll get this squared.
February 19th, we showed you the full $43 million budget.
Yeah.
23% is $11.5 million. When Ron and I talked about this using EcoDevo, we had used economic development funds on North Manhattan from Kimball to Research Park Drive. As I pointed out, there are, I don't know, pull up that memo again. There are 1,800 jobs, 332,000 square feet of office and lab space adjacent to this area. We felt like economic development should play a role. That's why it's in there. You got 3 years to make that decision. This debt won't hit bond and interest for 3 years. We've got plenty of opportunity to talk about how you want to use funds. By that time, quite honestly, we'll probably have been out for a renewal question, and we'll know if we have revenue from 2022 to 2032. Changes the discussion dramatically, unless we're, you know, if we're talking about levies, if we're talking about sales tax, if we're talking about economic development, renewal. The 7.5 that's sitting there is, you could argue it's 12 million. You're getting 5.6 back from NISTAC as well, KSUIC. So there's a lot of opportunity with that fund. 35% is dedicated to property tax reduction in the bond and interest fund. The other 65% via the question is allocated towards economic development by roads, by jobs, and infrastructure. Yes, the chamber has asked you to fence off 4 million. That could be for a year. That could be for 2 years. We've allocated 3 job applications. One has not proven out so well. The other has not even accessed the dollars just yet. Mm-hmm. We have provided incentives to the foundation, $800,000. We anticipate getting 500 of that back. We really haven't spent a lot of money on the job side.
And then on KSUIC, when does that begin to pay?
It's a 15-year payback. They're in year 3. The first 3 years are 50 grand. Years 4 through 15 are $457,000 a year.
Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, that's pretty close to, you know, when we get to this point. This is pretty close to paying that back, so.
Yep.
Just to put it in context.
I guess the other thing to keep in mind is that obviously the whole North Campus corridor is it's a moving project. and it's something, as each phase goes into final design, we'll have better numbers, and each bid will have variable results. And all through the next 5 years, we'll continue to pursue other revenue sources. That's going to help eliminate some of those funding requirements. And so, as Jason said, this is our preliminary recommendation because we're awarding a project, so we'd like the record to show that there's support for some type of funding, as whether you're here or you're the next folks that follow in your footsteps are here making that decision. What was the commission's intent on this project? So the records will be there for that, but at the same time, we may have a lot different funding options 3.5 years from now when we're ready to issue final bonds for the project. And so that's kind of where that is.
What is the speculation for the rest of this calendar year with regard to the North Campus Corridor and the use of economic development money?
There'll be another project at College in Kimball. I'd assume we would probably be recommending some of the same split, and then you'd have options of either applying ED funds on our share or of the percentage split that's going to the city at large, of being eco-devo or bond and interest, or some combination thereof.
Are you, the money that the commission is considering to move the electrical lines on the west side of the campus on College Avenue, does any of that include economic development money, or are you talking only bonding?
I assume it's part of the overall project, so it would be part of the project that would be funding the whole thing, and it's a piece of it, so.
23%.
Well, roughly.
Project itself is, to Barry, I think was 1.9 million, so that would add to the total. We take 23% of the total and have to find funding for it.
Of the,
It's a $12 million
project.
Any funding we provide would, if we decide that it should be buried, then we have to pay our 23% of that, yeah.
I think Commissioner Morris makes a valid point, and we have to obviously pay attention as we go along with this, how much we're relying on funds that have additional uses like the Economic Development Fund. With that being said, if this was infrastructure in a suburban neighborhood, I would feel differently, but because it's infrastructure in a commercial district that is supposed to, and the whole point of us doing it is to drive job growth, that I think it's a valid use in this instance of economic development money. And when I sit down and had a discussion with the chamber, yeah, it was the $4 million total, and there's $7 million setting in that fund. So I would rather see this come out of this fund than go on top of the general fund. So I'm supportive of how it's set up currently.
Yeah, this particular project, I'll just remind you all, the future of Research Drive comes around in loops. We're moving Baker's Way up further north. There's intersection site distance issues. We're dealing with the vertical curve. We're cutting down that, so it's a better intersection, not only for Baker's Way, for AIB and their operations, but also it facilitates a good intersection design when Research Drive continues to the south and hooks into North Manhattan. So again, a little bit to Commissioner McKee's comment about it's not in a residential neighborhood, it's in one of our corridors where we expect hopefully more lots and continued success at AIB.
The item H that was asked here is not a request for determination of how to pay for it. We've had this discussion before, though. We need to be mindful of where the funds are coming from, but this particular item only asks 3 things.
Yeah.
And one was accept the engineer's estimate. And I think the first estimate we had was around 2 million, so even though the bid came in $200,000 higher than anticipated by the engineer estimate, it was still underneath the original estimate of around $2 million.
Yeah, and we provided in the packet, there's a memo from myself to you all and the city manager about, and under the charter ordinance 44, it allows us to award bids that exceed 7%. We do have some strong stipulations about when they can start, when they can end, and we have a pretty high penalty compared to even some KDOT contracts that are out there. We want to stay on schedule. We don't want to break our promises to President Myers and K-State. There's 64 working days in the project, and that doesn't count for weather days. They don't get to count weather days. So going back out, I don't think is going to yield any better bids.
Thanks.
Yeah, my concern was that it was about $250,000 over. I hope this is not going to be the case for all of them, because this project is just ballooning like crazy, and I'm really, really worried about it. Where I started off 4 or 5 years ago is not where we're at now from the last time President Myers came and spoke to us. So it's close to $50 million, and it's a little scary and daunting. So I just want to make sure, even though we say, it's only 250 and it falls in this and this, I don't know how to make it lower, but I'm glad we're going to look at other funding sources, and I hope we do it very aggressively with the build grant and with whatever infrastructure grants they're talking about at the federal and the state level, because even though I'm not for taking money out of EcoDevo, I'm almost afraid that might increase what we take out. We are seeing 450 some odd right now, but it might end up increasing if all of the other needs are not met from whatever other funding sources we're thinking of. Yeah, we're going for star bonds, but I don't know what's going to happen with that. So I just want us to be very cautious with this, because like I said, it went from 20-something to 50-something, $1 million.
I want to make the motion that we approve item H of the consent agenda.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Commissioner McKee?
Yes.
Commissioner Morse?
I'm going to vote no, because I have made a commitment through these several years to attempt to protect the economic development money so that we have options when we have opportunity. We know that K-State will be back on their third building for some economic development money. That's coming up. Their second building is now pretty much committed. I think these economic development money, this money will disappear quickly, and it will all be committed to the North Campus corridor. And that's not what my vision was for the entirety of the community. And so I am still in the protected mode, and not just building streets. Everything, some people vote only for concrete and metal. And there's some other things that are less tangible, and we need to be able to take advantage of. And that's what I want to hold out for, is a higher goal. So my vote is no.
Mayor Dodson?
Yes?
Commissioner Reddy?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Motion carries 4-1.
All right, thank you very much. No further business. We'll adjourn. Thank you.
You said 4-1. Yeah.
That was a really good comment.
Thank you.